Hello everybody, how's it going? Yo, happy Friday. Welcome everybody to the Digital Basement. I hope y'all are doing well. I'm of course Mr. MKL. What's up, QTKO? Hey, Punk. Hey, yo, I am so glad. Yo, we can have a lovely little dinner conversation, man. You can just bring your gnocchi to class, or whatever delicious meal you've decided to make today. Ooh, orzo bolognese, nice. That sounds good to me. Well, welcome everybody. Yo, we're gonna let people file on in. I don't even know if did the pre-rolls end. The pre-rolls have ended. Okay, that's cool. But yo, we are here. It is the Fighting Game Community University. FGCU is back in session. Now we've done a couple of these over the last year or two, I guess, where we try to I try to intellectualize my hobby of pushing buttons with schoolgirls and ninja boys. But this is what I like to do, man. I like to talk about some of the bigger ideas in the fighting game community, and I want to have these discussions. The discourse, I've talked about it before. The discourse gets out of control, so I want to have some discussions. Pulls up to the lecture hall in PJs. I mean, that's cool, man. I'm all about the comfy pants, all right? So yeah, so I've been wanting to do more of these FGC University things, and I guess I've been thinking a lot about fighting games, what they are, the fighting game adjacent stuff, like so many of the things that we play here in the Digital Basement and in the niche fighting game scene writ large. It strays from, your traditional fighting games in a lot of ways. So, I'm always thinking about what are these things? What are the things about these games that, like, no, it's not a fighting game, but like it's a rhythm game, it's a music game, but also it's really kind of fighting gamey, or these things that are like shooters. My favorite example, I've brought it up before, is Twinkle Star Sprites, where it's a head-to-head shmup, but it is so intrinsically fighting gamey in so many ways. And I'm like, why? What is it? Like, we can, like, I'm more than happy. Like, some folks just want to run on vibes. I run on vibes for these things. I come up to a game and I'm like, yo, this is kind of fighting gamey. Nice. I'm just gonna like slot it right in here, right? And that's cool. Like, we can go about that. But I think it might be interesting to like create a bit of a framework to look at these things. And one of the frameworks that people have used in the past to look at, video game genres, and to try to learn, like, what is it about these designs? What makes it this type of game? Was something called the Berlin Interpretation, which was created in 2008, I believe. Yes, in 2008, there was posted by Jeff Late in rec.games.roguelike.development. Good old IRC. Gotta love it. What's up, Emmy? Right? Does Dance Dance Revolution count as a fighting game? These are the big questions that I want to answer. And it seems silly, right? But like, for me, like fundamentally, one of the things that I like doing is looking at games through different lenses, right? And I mean, I think a lot of our indie games do a really good job of looking at fighting games through a different lens and applying, lessons learned from other genres to them, and to create very interesting things that still fall within the bounds of our broader genre, right? So we're gonna go through this. This is like, I was trying to decide, like, what department are we in? If this is the FGC University, what department are we in? And it's like, it's some humanities department, that's for dang sure. But like, I don't know, maybe we're in the archaeology wing, something like that. Yeah, the roguelike purist hopes that a roguelike will release sometime. And so yeah, we're gonna have some. We're gonna lay out some ground rules for what we're doing here, but like, to talk a little bit about the Berlin interpretation. I mean, like, this is it's an interesting. It's an interesting attempt, right? So there's a preamble to the text. The definition of roguelike was created at the International Roguelike Development Conference in 2008, and is the product of a discussion between all those who attended. The definition was used on from Rogue Temple, right? So from like this IRC chat, was used as a starting point for the discussion. Most of the factors here are newly phrased, new factors have been added, yada, 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 right? So, like, this is, it. Yeah, FGC Theory 101, right? Like, we're in the liberal farts. Punk, you're right at home. Yeah, what's Andreas City? Let's call the interpretation after that, right? And I mean, and like I said, this is, the Berlin interpretation was kind of like one of the inspirations for the, I think we're gonna try to look at it, once again, a little bit differently. But like, the basement interpretation, that's what I'm rolling with for now. Definitely, Andrea deserves some love. They have definitely inspired, I think, a lot of us in our thoughts on fighting games and design. They have been an excellent sounding board for a lot of my ideas, so they've got some, there's a little bit of Andrea in here in terms of like what we're talking about. All right, so what we're going to be doing here today in class, friends, and I hope that you've brought some of your thoughts with you. They're in your head, no doubt. Maybe they're on paper, actually, like some of you I know who have written them down, and that's awesome. Thank you so much for taking the assignment seriously. I appreciate y'all. Oh yeah, I know, I see the stragglers coming in. It's all right. We got a seat for you at the back there, Kiro. But yeah, what we're going to be trying to do today is create the basement interpretation of fighting games, right? And it is, the basement interpretation, much like the Berlin interpretation, is a collection of factors or features of the, in the Berlin interpretation's case, it was the roguelike genre, and in our case, it'll be in the fighting game genre. And there are these factors are all weighted into two categories: high order factors, which are very important, or low order factors, which are slightly less important, right? And first and foremost, there is no single factor that will be like, this makes you a fighting game, or this means you're not a fighting game. Having or missing any one or any combination of these factors does not necessarily disqualify you or qualify you as a fighting game. And I think this is my thing. And like, one of the biggest criticisms of this kind of like interpretation is that it's used very prescriptively, where it's used to like explicitly define things. And my intention is not for this to be something to narrow down the scope of what a fighting game is, but it is in fact to help broaden it, right? Where one of the takeaways I hope people could have is saying, if I'm making a game and I appreciate fighting games, and maybe I'm not making a fighting game, right? But I appreciate certain aspects of fighting games, and I want to embody them in my platformer, in my RTS, in my whatever the case may be, right? Then perhaps you could use this interpretation to tease out some of the factors that like influence and entice people and really define the genre of fighting games, and see how that can be applied to a different genre. Maybe you might want to make a fighting game, but you want to go maybe a little bit off script. You don't want to be your traditional type of fighting game, right? And so you can use this to broaden the scope of it. It's like, what is at the edge? What are the edge cases that you can push at to broaden the scope of what fighting games are without like breaking through that limit and just being something else entirely, right? So once again, I want this to be an expansive thing, right? Yeah, how can we push the genre to its limit? And so that's it. It's like, I don't want someone to use this to look at these things and say, oh no, you don't count as a fighting game and you don't count as a fighting game, and you, right? But it's like, instead say, why might you count as a fighting game? In which ways do you count as a fighting game, right? Because just because something might fall on the outskirts or even on the outside doesn't mean there isn't still some connection there that is valuable, right? So once again, it's about kind of expanding that thought. And on that note, there are some general principles from the Berlin interpretation, which I think are kind of important to look at here, right? Roguelike refers to a genre, and not merely games that are like Rogue, right? So like the Basement interpretation isn't just about, Street Fighter clones. It is about is not nearly about games that are just like Street Fighter, right? The genre is represented by what is known as its canon, and canon texts in like religious institutions are those sacred texts that are considered, right, to be the authoritative ones, right? And so genres are represented by its canon. So the canon for roguelikes are games like Adom, Angband, Crawl, NetHack, and of course, Rogue, right? So this is what we're going to be doing. We're going to set up our list of canonical games, much like the Berlin interpretation worked from their list of canon games and said, what are the features of these games which make them intrinsically roguelikes? We're going to do that for fighting games. So we're going to list out, 5 to 8 maybe fighting games that are definitional in terms of influencing the scope of fighting games, the genre we know today, right, as they are. And then from there, once we have that list of our canon games, we can tease out some of those factors, some of those features, and we can decide, are they high order, are they super important, are they low order factors, are they like present, but they're not like your super make or break, but they're those things that make you like lean in that direction, right? And then once we structure that, we'll have our kind of interpretation that we can apply, right? It's like applying those features to our canon games is going to be like, yes, these are all there, right? That all makes sense. And then we can apply it to other games that are games like maybe Twinkle Star Sprites, Dance Dance Revolution, right? And see where those games, like what factors from our interpretation apply to those other games, right? To see how they connect to fighting games as a genre. Maybe we can tease out why some of our games are considered fighting game adjacent. And maybe we can consider why, like, maybe they're not really fighting games, but maybe they're like part of fighting game. Like there's a lot of crossover between fighting game players and these other games and genres. Maybe we can figure out why this is. Literally just woke up. I'm glad you're here for the lecture, folks. Time to find things to break. Yeah. No, you guys are getting it, right? And so that's it. Expansive mindset going forward. But we've got it laid out here, right? This is what we're going to do. Went on the other day, started asking, is Splatoon a fighting game? And this is the really fascinating thing. And it's like, oftentimes you'll find your answer is no, even though it lines up with a lot of these factors that you have in your mind. You find that your answer to the question, is it a fighting game, might be no. But there's still this kind of connection there, and it's interesting to tease out why. And like I said, it's a good exercise for someone as a developer, as a thinker, to say, like, why might these other games be connected? What if we define fighting games by the Steam category of fighting games? Also an interesting experiment. And I think what we'll find is that if you use this kind of interpretation in the worst, like, faith way possible, if you, like, just, like, right, like, abuse it to the point of breaking, then you'll find that is basically how the Steam algorithm works, where it considers any of these aspects, where you might say fighting games have hand-to-hand combat, and therefore every game with combat is a fighting game, right? Any game where you fight is a fighting game, and that's not helpful. We're going to try to be a little bit more granular than that, right? Important to understanding how for a very long time beat-em-ups and fighting games were synonymous, absolutely, and at some point those diverged, right? And there are some features, you could make this interpretation for beat-em-ups as well, and you would see that there are many similar factors, but there's going to be some other factors over here which don't really apply to fighting games, and that's kind of the path where they diverge, right? Where do you send your assignment? I mean, we're going to be, like I said, we're going to be working through this together. So I'm glad you have your notes. We'll take it forward. I really want people to post these things, man. Like, post them on a blog and talk about it. Post them on, right, on Twitter and in the Discords and such. I want to see people's, like, independent thoughts. Like, outside of this, like, I want to build this together, but also outside of this, it's interesting to, like, do this on your own. And I think we're going to get a lot of interesting perspectives out of that. All right. So, the basement interpretation of fighting games, friends. This is where we're at. So yeah, I think there is like right from the Berlin interpretation here. This list can be used to determine how roguelike or how, right, in our case, fighting game-like a game is. Missing some points does not mean that a game is not a fighting game. Likewise, possessing some of these points does not mean that it is a fighting game. We're using this as a tool to expand our understanding of the genre and broaden its scope, as well as better understand the history of fighting games. Some kind of general principles. I think these are good ones to go by, right? Probably an important place to start. One of the main principles for you, Andrew, is multiple completely different in playstyle characters. That tenet that you usually mean when you ask to get inspiration for fighting games. Yeah, in playstyle and overall character. Absolutely, absolutely. But before we get there, we have to determine our canon fighting games. All right. So, man, where do we begin, right? And I think this is, we need to go back. We need to go way back. Where does the genre fighting games begin? Right? Ye Are Kung Fu, Street Fighter, Karateka. Is it famed 1976 arcade game Heavyweight Champ? Is it Rock'em Sock'em Robots? Right? There is a long legacy, and depending on how far back you want to go, you can trace it back to mechanical games. But I think for the purpose of this discussion, it is probably fair to say that mechanical games, well, 100% like an inspiration and a source for head-to-head fighting games, is definitely prehistory, right? I know we had a QTKO, we were having a bit of a chat. Yeah, they're the ancestors, exactly. We were having a bit of a chat about this in the Discord, right? And it's like, there is a lineage there, 100%. Yeah, not quite the beginning. In the beginning, you know, I mean, the first fighting game was God watching Cain and Abel. I mean, no, we're not going that far back. Right? But I think video games, we need to start with at least video games, right? But there is a whole history of mechanical combat and boxing games and stuff like that, that are definitely inspirations for the fighting game genre. But I think Heavyweight Champ in 1976 was probably the earliest example of a video game that could kind of sort of, if you squint a little bit, maybe if you just woke up from a nap and you were a little blurry, right? That you could see it as a fighting game. Yeah, so yeah, QTKO, who has done a fair bit of research into kind of these ancestral fighting games. Yeah, saying Knockout Fighters 1928 is the ancestor, Heavyweight Champ 1976 is the establishment, and then Street Fighter 2 and Fatal Fury are the ones who codified it. Absolutely. And I would say, like, when we're looking at okay, I talked about in my introduction, right, last week, that one of the thought processes of this is because, like, you think definitional games inspire other games before they codified a genre, right? So we have games like Doom, right, who inspired other people to make first-person shooters, but they weren't really known as first-person shooters yet. So all these games came out that were known as Doom clones, right? The Duke Nukems of the world, the Unreals, right? There were like countless named and like now forgotten games which were just called Doom clones, right? But at some point in time, that collection of developers codified the genre, and you could probably look at the canon games for first-person shooters and say Doom, Duke Nukem, right, Unreal, those are probably foundational games, canonical games. And then the features that they have are what defined first-person shooters, right? And so this is the trail that we are going down, right? And so, yeah, when you look at the ones that codified the genre, I think those are the ones that we're looking at. That, like, there were things like Colossal Cave Adventure that I believe came before Rogue, right? There was a bunch of text adventures that came before it. Those were the precursors to it. But what codified the roguelike was Rogue and its contemporaries. So looking at, that's what I think we should be starting. Our canonical games are really the ones that codified fighting games as we know them. And I think those are the ones that I think, you know, that unequivocally, man, like I said, if someone were to say to you, Street Fighter is not a fighting game, you'd be like, no, it's a fighting game. If someone said Mortal Kombat wasn't a fighting game, you'd be like, no, it's a fighting game, right? And I think those games from around that era, we're looking at the late 80s into early 90s. So I would say, to start off, I think the obvious one, right, guys, it's Street Fighter. This is the obvious choice for our canonical ones. Now, I think there's some debate. I don't know. What do you think? Street Fighter 1 or Street Fighter 2? What merits it? I mean, I'm almost tempted to mash those together. I knew it. I knew this was going to be it, right? Because Street Fighter 1 has, I think, right, not to get too ahead of ourselves, it's going to have some of the features, obviously, that make up our interpretation, but it's also missing a couple foundational ones. So, like, and those are ones that exist and have been codified in Street Fighter 2. So I think depending on how far back you want to go, right? Well, what do you consider codification? What do you consider an expansion on versus a foundational choice? Was it the choices in Street Fighter 1 or Street Fighter 2? You're going to get a mix of that, right? So I'm almost tempted to mash SF1 and SF2 together as Street Fighter for our canonical games. And if you mash it together, you have to mash Fatal Fury into it. See, but like, ooh, okay, I was just gonna say Fatal Fury's from a different developer, but there is crossover developer because they've left Capcom. Oh my god, okay, I see what you're getting at. You guys are getting us into the weeds already. I appreciate you. I do. Yeah, Street Fighter 1 being basically unknown until we started revising history. I mean, that's true in terms of the fighting game lore that we project as the community. There's been a bit of revisionist history in terms of the appreciation for Street Fighter 1. I don't think that's necessarily a knock against it as being a canonical game, though. Yeah, you can't ignore the SNK and the history. Absolutely not. MEK saying Street Fighter 1 as a non-canon pre-fighter and Street Fighter 2 as a canonical one. Versus play... Okay, and this is, again, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but one of the factors here would be versus play with unique character archetypes, right? There's something about the meaningful choice of character who has different options. Both players can have equal opportunity to select them, but there's this asymmetry in the character options, right? Street Fighter 1 lacked that. It had it in the bosses, but you couldn't play as them, right? The head-to-head features. And so that's it. It's there, but not in a head-to-head fashion, which is probably another one of the core components that we're going to be looking at. So Street Fighter 2 then did offer multiple selectable characters with asymmetric features to them, right? So I think that's the fundamental difference between Street Fighter 1 and Street Fighter 2. And I would say if lacking that is like takes away from it being foundational, then I could see you only including Street Fighter 2 in the canon and saying that Street Fighter 1 was a proto-fighter in that kind of sense. Yeah, 88, I believe, was Street Fighter 1. There were beat-em-ups, Punk, between Street Fighter 1 and Street Fighter 2, but no Street Fighter fighting games between them. Yeah, so the oldest one that most closely represents the genre, right? Okay, and that's true. So once again, okay, so in order to avoid getting too far into the weeds, maybe that's the best way to do it with this kind of stuff. Vibe it out, right? If you present me with Street Fighter 1, do I say this is not a fighting game? No. I say it's a fighting game. Whereas if you present me with Heavyweight Champ and say this is a fighting game, I might question that, right? If you present me with Karateka even, I might question that. Though, there is a legitimate argument for Karateka being a canonical fighting game. So, 87 for Street Fighter 1. Thank you, QTKL. Yeah, genres can completely change between instances of a franchise. That was true. That is true. Okay. So we're adding Street Fighter to our list of canonical games. All right, it's going in there. I am going to do a / SF2. Right? But I think that they are close enough. That they are close enough that I could see I could justify grouping them together. You disagree with lumping them. All right. Hey, no. This is it. I'm curious. I'm curious to get the temperature. I mean, we've had a bit of a split in terms of you feel the same if we're not also lumping Fatal Fury in with Street Fighter 1. Okay. You know what? That's absolutely fair. That is absolutely fair. Yo, Was, thanks for the follow. Okay, so we're gonna do that. Street Fighter 1 and Street Fighter 2. They both deserve to be there because I think there is some foundational stuff done in Street Fighter 2 and its follow-ups that are notable. You've been talking Fatal Fury is another one that came out, like you said, within months, right? Oh, absolutely, Andrew. We are going to be, yeah, this is where you see the schisms happen, right? Boo ads. I will try to catch the ad next time. Here, we got 40 seconds, friends. Yo, we're gonna chill. We're gonna take a little break. Hey, I got my coffee, man. Oh God, I just got some delicious ass coffee from that was at the Canadian National Exhibition. I went to the X. Let's go to the X for all my Canadian friends out there. And I found a lovely coffee dealer, and holy heck. Oh, well, so they do this fancy like sailor's blend where they like air out the beans in a like wooden sea salted container to get that like carrying the beans across the ocean vibe to it. Apparently they claim that it like mellows it out in a way. It is freaking delicious though. That's all that I know. Yeah, everyone. Yo, that's cool. That's cool. Listen, we're wrapping up the ad break. If you, grab yourselves a drink, friends. Like I said, I'm enjoying the coffee. We're going to take a little bit of a minute. We're just going to take a quick minute. Yeah, harvested by Popeye himself. But dude, there's apparently there's this like blueberry blend that he recommended for iced coffee, which I'm very excited to try out. Oh, I think we're back from the ad break. Welcome back, everybody. I know, I'm a little, dudes, I am 2 cups in and I got a thermos beside me. I'm going to be a little jittery today, all right? Hey, so far the captions are still picking up, so I'm good. Yeah, so Super HC, yeah, absolutely. So this is really interesting, and something I hope that people actually kind of collect a list of. What are the games that? Because I would say the Game & Watch Judge game. That's something that is like a proto fighting game. You could lump it in there as one of the like experiments in terms of that head-to-head aspect of it. But like. Yeah. Like you could do a whole thing just about precursor games to fighting games before you even arrive at not even Street Fighter 2, before you even arrive at Street Fighter 1, right? There was like 30 years of, no, not 30, sorry, 10 years between, what am I talking about? I'm doing the math to 2000. There's like 10 years between Heavyweight Champ and Street Fighter 1, and there's a lot of stuff in there that is like, that could be very useful to explore. Yeah, Ye Are Kung Fu and Karateka. Thank you. That's absolutely it, Butler, right? So, and those are, but I think those are 2 games that are absolutely foundational for the genre, but should not necessarily be included in the canon, because you see all those aspects in something like Street Fighter 1. Like, if we're already having the discussion of whether or not Street Fighter 1 versus Street Fighter 2 should be the canonical game, we have chosen to include both. I think Street Fighter 1 represents everything learned from the proto games, and Street Fighter 2 represents the real solidification of those features into something that could be soon considered a genre, right? And one of the reasons we have Fatal Fury here is actually because that is one of the games that has also gone a long way. Released, I mean, what was it, like 7 months, five months? Was it March to April, May, June, July, right? So like, yeah, we're looking less than a year between Street Fighter 2 and Fatal Fury, 2 games that worked really hard to kind of, March to November, thank you very much, to kind of create this, the ground floor of the fighting game genre, right? Yeah, a lot of surf rock bands showed a bunch of influence for heavy metal, right? Sabbath came along and solidified it, right? You can't deny the influence of those, but should they be considered canonical, right? Like, once again, the genre is represented by its canon. And I think the furthest that I could realistically say we should go back is Street Fighter 1, right? That anything past there, the genre is no longer represented by the canon of those prehistoric games. You see them there, you see it, but not representative. So I think Street Fighter, right, 87, and then it took some iteration, it took some thoughts in terms of other games that came out in that era to really, for developers to come back around, and for 2 separate developers to come back around to the idea of what we will learn to be as fighting games, right? And we have Street Fighter 2 and Fatal Fury to thank for it. Yeah, there's definitely a category of prologue, prehistoric or influential games, right? But that are not quite here. I think we have to add Darkstalkers for popping the lid off the combat sports restriction and the wildness of the genre that resulted from that. Okay. I think that's actually a good idea. Okay, let's do this. So once again, I think Fatal Fury is notable for it's a kind of a lateral look at special moves, moving into desperation moves. It does something with their character archetypes and how it incorporates the functions of how you play the game in some pretty important ways. And if not for that, I think we would have ended up with more Street Fighter clones. But instead, we had people being able to look at these two kind of examples, plus combat games, and then be able to broaden the genre from there, right? And yes, so I think, well, man, we're getting into it. I do love this, because you're right, Butler, I would agree. Both Darkstalkers and Asuka 120 have an important place in this discussion. I think Darkstalkers, for the way it handles mobility, the way it handles meter management and resource management, the way it expanded on how you deal with space control, all these things that existed in Street Fighter and Fatal Fury, and that now got expanded on, and that you could see the direct lineage between Darkstalkers and the Hyper Fighters like Children of the Atom and X-Men vs. Street Fighter, and finally Marvel vs. Capcom, right? You could see that lineage there. And then, by the same token, you can see it going from Street Fighter, Fatal Fury, Asuka, into games like Melty Blood, and a lot of the Japanese doujin scene, which has seen some kind of, I wouldn't say recycling, but has seen a cyclical influence of a couple games influencing indie devs, influencing some medium-sized devs who can bring that back to the wider scene. Yeah, we're only at 1991. We gotta slow down a bit. Okay. So, I think after Fatal Fury, I think that's a good base. Street Fighter 2, Fatal Fury. Like I said, Darkstalkers, right? For its influence on the kind of hyper fighter nature of the genre is very important to have. And you can see traces of that in Sailor Moon. You can see traces of that goes into Melty and Under Night and Eternal Fighter Zero and all of the Toho games, right? Like, you can see that kind of all bubble up thanks in part to games like Darkstalkers and Asuka 120. Now, yeah, Darkstalkers to Guilty Gear is also a very clear lineage. Which is, okay, so I am putting Guilty Gear in here because I need to. I'm gonna put Asuka 120 with an asterisk for a moment. Just for a moment. As we work our way through here, right? Like, we gotta try to keep this in a reasonable shape. Would you consider Art of Fighting in there, or is it not different enough? And so that's probably my stance on Art of Fighting. While it has obviously important, important like design aspects to it, and it has an important place in the history of fighting games, I would not consider it canonical in the same way. Yeah, in a low order sense, exactly. So if I would agree with QTKO there that AOF is very important, but in a low order sense. When we're looking at the canon, like, these are it's once again the absolutely definitional ones, right? And I think Art of Fighting is a great example of one that expands. Same with Sam Show, absolutely. Same with Sam Show, right? And so I think as we move forward in our timeline here, because, like, once again, and this is why I have an asterisk on Asuka 120, because I'm curious as to whether or not that is simply an anticipated expansion, or whether that is a particular diversion point, right? And I would say Darkstalkers and Guilty Gear are two particular diversion points in the genre, which have contributed to, like, what we see as the wider picture of fighting games as being, like, what they are, right? And we cannot forget about Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat is absolutely there. Add Eternal Champions, you coward. Oh, I'm tempted. Are we talking canon fighting game franchises? So, I mean, I think we will largely find that the canonical games will be the first games in the series, probably with the exception of Street Fighter, right? like Street Fighter 2, I think has some pretty different things. But like once again, like so like the difference, like yes, Street Fighter 3 extremely important. Not in the same way that Street Fighter 2 is in terms of being a canon game. So that's where I'm at. So I feel a lot of sequels will probably fall outside of that and be low order, really important, obviously, but not quite make that, you know, cross that bar. So I think Mortal Kombat is really important for expansion on the idea of combo systems, right? How routing works, how combo works, how normals function. The block button is a particularly important aspect of it. I would say it's probably one of the foundational games that incorporated that as opposed to back to block. And once again, all things that I think if someone says to you, a fighting game doesn't have a block button, you would say, of course fighting games have block buttons. And we can trace that back to largely Mortal Kombat or games like Virtua Fighter and Tekken, which we have talked strictly about two-dimensional fighting games. But I think Virtua Fighter and Tekken are 100% very important to be included in this. Yeah, Mortal Kombat being one of the only reasons we have the ESRB. That is a fun footnote, man. I think it's going to be Tekken 3 and not Tekken 1 or 2. And okay, and here is where I admit some of my lack of knowledge. Now, I have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to 3D fighting games and the history of them. So I'd be curious to know from chat here, what are the differences? Like, what about Tekken 1, 2 versus 3 would you say? I mean, for me, once again, foundationally, I played the original Tekken. I recognized it as a fighting game despite being very different from Street Fighter, probably due to a lot of the features that we're going to be talking about. Tekken 3 feels like Tekken. So, like, how does Tekken 3 feel like Tekken in a way that Tekken 1 doesn't, right? Because, like, for me, like, Virtua Fighter, I mean, despite all the changes throughout the years, is still, I mean, I recognize Virtua Fighter 1 as Virtua Fighter. But I could say that, okay, fine, maybe I'm not knowledgeable about Tekken for that, but yeah, Tekken has just, right, it's just like, for me, that like, its impact is one thing, but once again, we're not talking necessarily about social impact, but about how representative is fighting games, how much do these games, let me rephrase that, how much are these games represented by the genre, right? Like, how, that's the connection we need to make. Oh, okay, interesting. Tekken 1 and 2 feel very floaty and strange. They also lack sidestepping. Interesting. Okay. I will defer to the audience here. To the audience. To the class. What am I talking about here? I like this take on it, that Tekken is solidified its thing around 3. And allowing that to be the canonical Tekken representation, which has great influence on the wider world of fighting games, makes a little bit of sense to me. And then keeping VF1 as the canonical Virtua Fighter would work on that end, to once again help define the scope of 3D fighting games within the genre, right? Interesting. Okay, I really like that one. And okay, and then, so yeah, Killer Instinct. I have some thoughts on this too, and once again, I am willing to be convinced on this one. That Killer Instinct, it does do something really unique with its mechanics. I think in a way that can be considered like, even if there's no direct lineage, it could be considered kind of a wedge for interesting experiments, because KI does a really good job with its breaker system of being like, okay, how are we going to represent the mind games between players? It's not going to be neutral mind games. It's not going to be mix-up mind games as much, right? We're going to do this cool thing with the breakers. Cool, right? So, like, I could see that as being like, okay, look, it's one of those games that said very early on, there is a broader scope to things, and I could be considered that. But once again, yeah, is that a divergence point, right? Because I would say Virtua Fighter 1, it kind of helped diverge and solidify the definition of fighting games. Tekken 3 seems to be the one that, something diverged from there, some design thought diverged from there, and then was representative. Yeah, and QTKO, yeah, absolutely. And so I once again, I am trying to take a broad, expansive view of this. So this is obviously like this might get a little bit big, right? Like, that's in fairness, right? And there is definitely some use to narrowing it down. And I think you could do this with any subgenre, right? You could do this with just 2D fighters, just air dashers, just 3D fighters, just platform fighters. But I think to embrace the expansive nature, we have to. I think we're going to keep it broad, which is why Smash Brothers is in here. So yeah, the Team Fighter canon could be something like KOF 94, MVC. And I wanna put in X-Men Children of the Atom as well. And I think here is where I would end the canon, right? I don't think I am comfortable going beyond X-Men Children of the Atom in terms of talking about canonical games. But Coda definitely, once again, I think Darkstalkers was maybe a separation point for Air Dashers, Anime Fighters, and eventually into Hyper Fighters. And then Children of the Atom was the one that definitely put everything else over the top. And once again, if you think of fighting games and then you think of wild-ass explosive fighting games, the Hyper Fighter, whatever you want to call them, I think you'd find your way to Kota as being that. You'd throw in Melty Blood 1. Absolutely. Okay, and so this is why I have a couple of... This is why I have a couple of asterisks here, right? Because if we look at this, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 games, right? 13 games is kind of a lot. Like, if we think to the Berlin interpretation, it had 5 games in its canon, right? Yeah, it had 5 games in its canon. Now, I think roguelike is inherently a narrower scope, right? Like, once again, we were talking early on how it was kind of like canonical game makes, Doom makes Doom clone, makes FPSs, right? And the Berlin interpretation was working from rogue makes roguelike. And they were working from there. And so we're doing, whatever. Street Fighter makes Street Fighter clones or Street Fighter knockoffs makes fighting games. And so we're going to have, I think, a few more, especially if we're considering the broader scope of it. But, like, if we're getting this down to 10, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to cheat and put Street Fighter 1 and Street Fighter 2 together, I will admit, I would very much like to do this. I really would like to just have it be like this instead, which is just like a little indentation, man. Yeah, Melty is to Asuka what Doom was to Wolfenstein. Interesting. Yeah, WAS, right? KOF 94 and or MVC 2 in there as well, right? Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is That is one of the core things, you're right, that is missing from this. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, right. And thank you. So Andrew, and this is one of the convenient things about actually listing things out like this, right? Where you can see that, like, I look at this list and I'm like, look, man, Street Fighter 1 and Street Fighter 2 being like this does not feel right. But sure, I can buy this, right? Asuka feels kind of out of place, right? So look, no, I am not trying to cast any aspersions on my Asuka fans, all right? If we're looking at team games, right? So now the question is, if we're getting rid of... This is why you made 3 separate cannons. Right? I think we have Guilty Gear that is doing some of the work that Asuka is doing, but Asuka, very important, right? Yeah, this is, yeah, you made 3 cannons, 1 for depth, 1 for breadth, 1 for tech. Yeah, and once again, I really hope, like, this is, like, I hope one of the takeaways that people get from this is that not just this list, but using this kind of list to assess why you think something about a game, or why you like something about a game, or dislike it for that matter, right? Like, you can take this forward as a structure, that more than just necessarily this list. But I think this list is going to be interesting in its own right. And then Killer Instinct, absolutely, I agree there, right? This is, I'm looking at this list and I'm saying to myself, KI is extremely important. But I would say that, as was pointed out by Woths, having something team-based feels like we really need that in there, because team fighters are a core aspect of it, right? So here's, once again, we're gonna cheat this a little bit, friends. We're gonna cheat this a little bit. We're gonna have Street Fighter into Street Fighter 2 be one of ours, and we're gonna have Fatal Fury into KOF being another one. Because I think that is something that, like, once again, what is represent, like, is what, how is the genre represented by this canon? I think the team aspect needs to be there, and KOF can feed that team aspect, especially in conjunction with X-Men Children of the Atom, to allow that, right? And then Melty Blood as well, right? So, do we need... This, once again, these are why I have asterisks on these, right? Like, this is funny. Like, I'm going through this and I'm just like, no, I'm flagging this one because it doesn't quite vibe right as the foundational one. And I'm torn as to whether or not Melty Blood is, right, is a game that is a foundational, like, juncture in terms of the development of the genre or not. Absolutely. I think, and Butler, I'd agree. I think Melty Blood is important more for its cultural impact. So if we're thinking about, definitional aspects of a genre, I don't think it's necessarily meant to be there. But once again, like, it is 100% a very important game, right? So, yeah, right. And so that's it. So I think this is what we're gonna do. Let's sit on here with our, 9-ish. We have our 9-ish canon games. I think this is important, man. This is like, dude, okay, and This is why I don't want to get into like the tier list discussions, right? This is not what I'm trying to do here. But this is what happens. We got our top 5 characters in a game, and now we have our, top 6 or top 10 characters below them. But they're all in, 6th place anyways. They're all 6th best in the game. They're just sitting there. Lol, yeah. Tekken under VF. I like it. Virtual On help craft the arena fighter genre. Yeah, I think we have our very early fighters, right? Street Fighter into Street Fighter 2, Fatal Fury into KOF. Those are pretty foundational. Like, I don't think anyone is like, no, these didn't greatly influence the course of fighting games as a genre, right? Darkstalkers is our gateway into the Hyper Fighter or the Air Dasher, right? We have Guilty Gear, which did some foundational things for its aspects. We have Mortal Kombat, which was a slight, very, very soon after Street Fighter and Fatal Fury, right? And I think expanded the scope of how you do offense and defense and what people expect of the game feel of the genre, right? And then we have our 3D fighters, Virtua Fighter 1 and then Tekken 3, which strikes me as perfectly reasonable, right? Yeah, many things that MK1 did at the time. It was, right, and once again, I think important, especially in terms of how it broadened the idea of what was possible with the genre. And so other developers that came after looked at those and said, oh, we're out here, I can go here. Which, once again, right, that's what the goal of this here today is, right? We're going to figure out where we're at with fighting games and find out how to make them bigger and better. See, I'm comfortable enough, right? Okay, like I'll admit, the nesting of Fatal Fury into KOF, I'm not the most comfortable with it, but I think this makes sense, right? Like, this makes sense as a block to me. I see this as a bridge, right? We got this, that makes sense as a block. Then we have our platform fighters, right? It looks to Smash Brothers went and looked to say, what is interesting about Fatal Fury, KOF, Street Fighter, and all these games? Oh, all these other things. So let's do it in a, with influence from a platform fighter, which once again, you can argue whether or not Smash is part of the FGC, but I don't think you can argue whether or not Smash is a fighting game. It's a fighting game, right? And then of course, Children of the Atom, which takes inspiration from the team aspect and all of the, higher energy, Hyper Fighters and Air Dashers, as well as all the resource management that developed throughout this time, right? And then exploded it into the Hyper Fighter genre of Marvel vs. Capcom and games like that, BB Tag, etc., etc. Soon to be Corrupt. Oh god, I want to play Corrupt. No, Coda didn't have teams, but once again, I think the team games, the Versus series games, that style of game doesn't exist without Children of the Atom. And Children of the Atom, like, once again, if we're looking at lineages, right? Like, you can look Street Fighter, KOF, Darkstalkers, Children of the Atom into Marvel vs. Capcom, and all those other games. Oh yeah, and Kiro, yeah, you could, once again, how granular do you want to get? Yeah, you can narrow this down by subgenre, by developer, by publisher, whatever the case may be. And I think you would find some interesting results from listing those games out, right? All right, dudes, we have our canon. We forgot Shaq Fu. I know, there's no Shaq Fu, there's no Balls 3D. I mean, where's Mighty Warriors? Where's... No Tongue of the Fat Man, no Dino Rex. Oh God. Failing grade. No. Actually, y'all are getting a lovely passing grade at this moment. You really, everyone's put their thinking caps on. I find it really interesting that, like, we get what we're doing here, right? And I think I appreciate y'all. I just want to take a second to say I appreciate y'all for engaging in this in a, a forthright way. It is always refreshing when we can have some of this kind of discussion, right? I think we've had some great back and forth. I think everyone's personal list is going to be a little bit different. Like I said, if someone presented me a list that had Asuka and Melty Blood on it, I get it, right? Even like X-Men versus Street Fighter, yeah, I see it. Like, there's a lot of games that you could put in here, especially when you consider what people's influences and preferences are, right? Like I said, I'm a little sketchy on the 3D fighters, so I really appreciate it. I know some people would have Soul Calibur in there. As like, nah, man, absolutely must be there, right? Yeah, the weapons-based fighting game, right? You who knows? Yo, the indie game canon. Oh God, that one will get the Twitter going. You want to get the Twitterverse going? Right, but yeah, Battle Arena Toshinden, Sam Show, right? There are all these games that I think are all important and could easily find their way in here. And once again, this list isn't meant to be exclusionary, right? Kind of by definition we have to when we're creating our canon to have it be anything that's going to be useful. But, like it's not meant to be exclusionary in that way. And I think you can look at the factors that we're going to lay down. We're going to take a quick little break. I'm going to have to grab myself a drink. The factors that we're going to lay down that stem from our canon games that we have just decided on, those are the ones that you're going to be able to look at those and say, yeah, man, Battle Arena Toshinden, it's in there. Sam Show, it's in there. SMS, it's in there, right? Yeah, Soul Calibur, Soul Blade, right? Those would be in there. I think for the Martial Champion would be an interesting one. I'd have to look into where it fits into the timeline exactly to really judge, but that arguably, yeah, right? Dude, I want someone make a. If you make a fighting game canon and you include Dino Rex on it, and you determine what factors make that a fighting game based on Dino Rex, what game might you find that... I have one in mind, friends. Like, if Dino Rex was a canonical game, one of its features would probably be the elastic banding on cross-ups. That is something that's so fundamental to Dino Rex as a game that I think that would carry forward. And what modern day game that is kind of fighting game adjacent, at the very least, that does that? Punchimals. Punchimals does that. It has this elastic banding thing where you're on one side. It takes it a step further, and when you cross up, you can swap sides. It doesn't just reset the round like it does in Dino Rex. But you can draw a line from the way Dino Rex handles cross-ups and stage management and player positioning directly to Punchimals, right? Like, you can, and like, that's valid, man. That's real. Like, I believe that is a lineage that, while maybe not intentional, exists. So what else could you do? If, depending on what your canon is, your factors are going to be different, and how you look at the games that you analyze with it are also going to be a little bit different. And so, once again, this is not about this being the only way to look at it. This is one of the ways in which you can do it, though. But we are on ad time right now. This is a perfect opportunity for me to take a moment to grab myself a drink. Yo, thank you, everyone, for hanging out. We are going to be back in just a minute. In the meantime, friends, I've got the Patreon. Yo, if you want to help support us here in the Digital Basement, the Patreon is one of the best ways we can do it. We've got a Discord as well, where we all hang out and we chat with each other and we make cool stuff and, enjoy a cool space with a bunch of awesome people. And I hope you can come and make the space better. The Digital Basement would like more people. We got room on the couch. Y'all are welcome. So make sure to check that out. And of course, the YouTube. We will be right back. And when we get back, we're gonna settle in and we're gonna decide on our factors, our high and low order factors. Then we're gonna take a look at some games, man. It's gonna be a fun time. All right, stick with me, friends. Yeah, time to hydrate. Exactly. D'accord les enfants. Class is back in session. Hope everyone's doing well. Let you all settle down for a minute. Ooh, I see we got some chatting. Solid list of extremely important fighting game genres and franchises for sure. Absolutely. We have our canon. I think we've done a pretty good job so far, friends, of deciding on some of these foundational games, right? Once again, one of the core concepts here that we're dealing with in the basement interpretation is the genre is represented by its canon. So if we look at our games, if we look at Street Fighter 2, Fatal Fury, KOF, Darkstalkers, Guilty Gear, Mortal Kombat, Virtua Fighter, Tekken 3, Smash Brothers, and X-Men Children of the Atom, I think we can see a little bit of fighting games in every single one of those, right? So yeah, now we've discussed the foundation. We have to make a list of like games that are actually big and did big things for the community, and then check for that stuff that pushes the limits of the genre. Think zoning. Yeah, 2 fundamental characteristics to add already. All right, yo, QTKO. The floor is yours. What are the 2 fundamental characteristics that you are ready to add? Now, once again, friends, remember, we're going to be structuring these. We're going to list the characteristics and then we can categorize them, but there are going to be, you know, high order or high value factors and low order or low value factors. Both of them have their place in the discussion, but some are going to be more important than others. Interesting. Short bouts. Rapid gameplay leads to an emphasis on muscle memory and micro decisions. Contrast to longer competitive games with longer tactical strategies. Okay. I like this. I like this as perhaps a component of a larger factor, but I do like where you're going with this. Welcome D Wednesday. Glad you can make it. We're in class and we're trying to define in broad strokes the genre of fighting games. All right, so I think second characteristic you want to propose is what you've called intimate competition. Interesting. Okay. The number of players is small enough for your opponents to feel personal. As opposed to non-personal entities. Moment-to-moment reactions, says Andrew, and RPS versus long-term, on which you had a long talk on Discord. Absolutely. You think that's one of the things that distinguishes it from strategy games. Yes. Yes, and I would add there is a head-to-head component. Right? Either PvP or PvE, but like you say here, the number of players is small. Right? So, and okay, yes. And on top of that, there is this kind of idea of direct influence on each other, where, so we have some things here, right? Yes, and so like 2 to 4, which is why you'll see, right, games might be 1v1, they might be 2v2, they might be 3v3. Rarely do you get outside of that, and looking at the canonical games, 3v3 in some format is the biggest you can get, or you're looking at a free-for-all in up to 4 players in Smash Brothers, which is a component you can look at. But yeah, very, very small numbers, right? Ah, yes, Kiro, absolutely. Health bars and a combo system are 2 basic ones. I will actually share something that Andrea D, developer of Schwarzer Blitz, amongst many other games, they shared with me what they can list as their fighting game canon for classic fighting games, like what their features are. And I think we can start with this. I like... They list first and foremost, zero-sum game. One party wins, one party loses, right? I think that's a pretty interesting one. And I think we could have things like head-to-head, direct combat, right? I'm gonna list off a few, and then we're gonna go with this. Smash's time format. Yeah, so there are some interesting twists on the formula that Smash provides that allows this to be a more expansive definition. And yes, D Wednesday, absolutely. There are a number of good fighting games without combo systems. One of the very, very important things to remember about what we're doing here, building the basement interpretation of fighting games, is to recognize that no one of these factors that we are going to come up with is disqualifying, right? So just because you, just because you don't have combos doesn't mean that you are in a fighting game, even if combos is one of these high order factors or even a low order factor, whatever the case may be. So yeah, no, missing or having any one of them will not disqualify you or qualify you. That is not supposed to be that prescriptive, but it should, like, the idea is that when you're looking at these factors, it should make you consider how the games we play fit into it, right? Yeah, zero-sum game as a high-order factor is a great starting point, right? Zero-sum. One player wins, the other loses. I will say, typically, PvP, but also PvE, right? We have head-to-head direct combat. We have our zero-sum nature of the game. Yeah, we can look at fighting game adjacent games and ask why we call them that, and then look at these characteristics, and they will probably fit in there some way, absolutely. Is a PvE game really a fighting game? Excellent question, right? And once again, I would say the head-to-head direct combat being against, like, once again, Street Fighter 1 is PvE mostly, right? That the experience was primarily PvE, right? It doesn't make it any less of a fighting game because it doesn't have it, which is why I would say head-to-head direct combat, typically PvP, because that is kind of the thing most associated with it, but being PvE does not remove that, right? Motion inputs. Yes, special attacks and motion inputs. Unique moves typically tied to sequential button presses. Once again, typically tied to, because Smash Brothers, I mean, it has directional and a single button as opposed to quarter circle motions. It should be, this is one of the things about fighting games that people notice, but there are multiple ways to do it, which is why I think it's important that we have Smash Brothers as well as these other games included in our canon to have this be one of the features and the, like, have a feature this broad, basically, right? See, but then do beat 'em ups count? Wait, once again, no single factor. There are other genres that will incorporate some of these factors in some ways, which is why you find some genres to be fighting game adjacent, right? It is something in the mental calculus, right? But once again, our genre is represented by its canon, and the features should be represented there as well. Okay, I see meter, I see health bars mentioned. We have a couple things here that I think are important. And this is one that I had to think about how to word this one, right? Symmetrical information availability, a shared perspective, and no fog of war. This is, I think, something that will encompass a lot of what people have mentioned right here, right? Where including info includes health values, super meter, yeah, minimizing hidden information. Ah, that's good. All right. Symmetrical information availability and minimizing hidden information. I think those are intrinsically tied too, right? Because once again, it's the I had shared perspective in there to accommodate for the like 2D perspective basically, but realistically the core of it is that you share the same screen, right? Both players are looking at the same perspective from the game and have access to the same UI. And that means that there is no hidden information, or any hidden information is hidden symmetrically, right? And I think that's the important thing. You don't have access to any extra information compared to your opponent, right? You might be able to, figure out that you've charged long enough, but your opponent can see that you've down backed as well. Your opponent, if they know about charge partitioning, will know that you have been down backing and partitioned your charge, so you have charge now, and you can throw a sonic boom, right? So like the ability to detect that, and I think symmetry and in some ways asymmetry, right, are two components that are really important here, right? And so while symmetry is important for information, asymmetry is important for characters and character archetypes. Here, actually, let me do this instead. Whoops. Yeah, you don't often see, yeah. Time is a factor as well. I'm unsure how to include that right now, right? So what is a good thing? Because you're right, there is usually some kind of perhaps near zero sum clear win condition, limited rounds, and timer. Now, do you think we should include this under zero sum, or is this its own factor, right? because we could do clear win condition, limited rounds and timer, KO by health, ring out, etc. We definitely need to put a pin on the beat 'em up discussion. Oh no, yeah, and the beat 'em up, the world of beat 'em ups compared to like tied to fighting games, that is such a huge connection. Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. Principle is probably a good word to use. Yeah, limited round being its own factor because it's a measure of time, of speed, and replayability. I like that. I like that. We do have slight quibble with symmetrical information quality because your opponent can't always see your inputs. For example, if you're holding down back and or buffering super on wake up, your opponent doesn't know. But I feel like the language of minimizing asymmetrical hidden information gets it right. I like that. Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Absolutely. I can see that. I think we could probably clean this up in terms of the specific wording as time goes on, but that is an absolutely Woths. That is a totally cromulent point to be made. That yeah, there is some information that can be hidden or obfuscated, but the goal is to always minimize that, right? Or the tendency is to minimize that, right? I think that's fair. Yeah, I wouldn't make a big deal about it, except that you think the motion inputs are like the one source of asymmetrical information in these games, and you think it contributes to fighting games without motion inputs feeling pretty different, at least to you. I love that. I love that as a distinction. That is really well thought out. Thank you for that. Because yeah, that is totally fair. That is one of the places, which is why it's interesting, and this reveals actually one of my biases, because I have a tendency to look at fighting games, even today, through the lens of playing them in the arcade, which is where I discovered my love of fighting games. And in Canadian arcades, we had side-by-side cabs, right? So I was always right next to the dude and could see that was mashing or buffering super or whatever the case may be. And that like shared screen and shared control panel, I think remove some of that obfuscation for me, because I have the ability to just do that, right? Like, it's another thing I have to do, but I have the ability to do it. Whereas, I mean, like, you think a lot of other regions had head-to-head cabinets where you actually couldn't see what the other player was doing, right? And so like, it's funny, just really interesting that this just immediately revealed to me going through this process that, oh no, that's where my bias is, right? Because you're right, that would be hidden information that you wouldn't necessarily be able to glean. But my perspective didn't let me think of that because of, you know, where I started playing fighting games. That's really cool. I just as a little like sidebar to this conversation, I think that's really another useful thing that this kind of, you know, interpretation can provide. Right? Yeah, QTKO saying you grew up in the 2000s, so you're always thinking about console play, and the arcade roots are your blind spot. And it's totally like, that's just, that happens, right? That happens based on where you came from, right? And WAS, yeah, you play almost exclusively fighting games online, so you never had that stuff like face bashing DP on wake up, right? It's a thing. I actually idly do inputs when I'm knocked down and I know they can't do anything, because that is just something I did in the arcade to obfuscate it, right? And I do the Raging Demon input, right? And so it's like, I'm just like Raging Demon when I'm knocked down as Sakura, right? It doesn't matter, but that's what I'm doing, right? But it's so funny to think that has been ingrained in me, in part because of where I learned to play fighting games and learned to appreciate the genre. Hey, some versions of Sakura could. Sunburn Sakura? Come on. All right, so what do we have so far? Fighting game factors, right? Head-to-head direct combat, typically PvP, also PvE. Zero-sum game, one player wins, the other one loses. A clear win condition, limited rounds and timer. You know, KO by health, by ring out. Special attacks and motion inputs. Unique moves, typically tied to sequential button presses. Yo! Thank you, Griffey, for the raid. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to class, everyone. Heyo! Yo, thanks everyone for joining us here in the digital basement. Yo, this guy is Mr. MKL. We've got some cool people hanging out. It's the Fighting Game University today. We're in the process of defining what fighting games are. We have already decided on our fighting game canon, our list of canonical fighting games, and now we're deciding what about those games makes fighting games the genre that they are. Yo, just got out of detention. Forced you to learn Capcom Fighting Jam. Man, was that detention or were you working for extra credit? I'm not sure. Yo, welcome, Red Skull. So yeah, for a little quick catch-up for everybody, we have gone through and we have decided that our canonical games, you know, here's what we're doing here. We're determining how fighting game a fighting game is. You know, some of these points, they do not mean that the game is not a fighting game. Missing some of them does not mean that it's not a fighting game. Having some of them does not mean that it is a fighting game. We are using this as a tool to expand our understanding of the genre and broaden its scope, right? That's the goal here, friends. And so, what are our canonical fighting games? What are the fighting games that help define the genre? What is fighting games as a genre represented by? It is represented by games like Street Fighter and Street Fighter 2. By Fatal Fury and KOF, right? By Darkstalkers for the Dashers and the Air Dashers and the Hyper Fighters of the world. Guilty Gear for the anime fighters of the world. Mortal Kombat for its interesting takes on combo structure. Virtua Fighter and Tekken 3 for their contributions to the 3D fighting game realm. Smash Brothers for its influence on platform fighters and taking games in different directions. Of course, Children of the Atom for our Versus series lovers. We got the team games coming from KOF as well there. We got a little bit of everything, right? Some notable mentions, some honorable mentions who didn't quite make the cut of the canon though were of course Killer Instinct, Melty Blood, Asuka 120. Very, very, very important games. Help define the genre in many ways, but not quite canonical, you know. Man, and now we're deciding on what makes a fighting game a fighting game. And we got a few things here, right? We've been moving through, and we're gonna have to categorize these on whether they're high order factors, are they really important, or are they a little bit less important, right? But what do we have? Head-to-head direct combat. We have zero-sum games, right? Clear win conditions, special attacks and motion inputs, symmetrical information and minimizing hidden information, health values, super meter, all that good stuff. Stun values, if there's a hidden stun bar, they're equally hidden to both players, but you can track that based on how the game plays out. Multiple selectable characters and archetypes with asymmetrical movesets, man. Unique characters. You both go to a character select screen, you can select a character, someone else can select a different one, and they all have different movesets and different ways to interact with the world and each other. And I think this is what our next one really should be, right? What is our next, what is our next factor that can help define fighting games? I think there's a certain amount of interruptibility, right? Players can disrupt each other's actions. It is also simultaneous. Here's what we're gonna do. Simultaneous, interruptible. combat. Players can disrupt each other's actions. You have the ability to influence each other in the world. You might be putting out a button, but I can be putting out a button and I can change what you're doing, right? Like, that is kind of fundamental to this. And right, and I think it's connected to the selectable archetypes, where everyone has different tools to interrupt different things. This pulls into the rock, paper, scissors type dynamic of combat, right? And I think what else do we have? So what else do we have? Let's throw it on the list of games we have to play. Another factor. Yeah, no, I'm absolutely, the floor is open, students. What factors of fighting games, what about these list of fighting games that we went through, the Street Fighters, KOF, Children of the Atom, Darkstalkers, Virtua Fighter, what about them makes them unimpeachably a fighting game? And is there is that factor definitional for the genre? And should we be including it here? Being able to block your opponent's progression by delaying their win condition. I believe that would be like I think that falls pretty well under the simultaneous and interruptibility aspect of it, right? Where I can there's that's as well as the push and pull, really. How depending on how broadly you look at that, right? You can disrupt each other's actions. Like you can block their damage attempt. Okay, Typically PvP, okay, okay, under head-to-head direct combat, using tools to inflict and reduce damage. Ah, dang it, ad time? Okay. Yo, we're chilling, man. We can chill during ad times, it's cool. I'll take this opportunity to say thank you, everyone, for joining me here in the digital basement. I really appreciate it. I really love doing these FGC University things. I'm glad y'all swing by and help, create a great discussion around fighting games and in the scene. So much of the fighting game discourse can get very, very, very tired, right? So I'm glad that we can have a fun conversation, a productive conversation, and I'm really excited to do a quick split of some of these factors once we finish going through them into high and low order, and then to apply them to some games that we might be thinking up. So this is gonna be a fun time. But yo, reminder, friends, your daily reminder: spend your Bezos bucks, right? If you got those Twitch Prime subs lying around, if you got those bits lying around, I'd always appreciate it if you can drop them my way, or make sure you're dropping them somewhere else. Dude, Griffy Bones is out there doing great work. We got Butler out there doing amazing work. Joe P. Real, all these cool folks. Punk doing great streams. Support your indies, dudes. We say it a lot around here. Support your indies where you can. Don't let Jeff Bezos keep that money. They're just gonna fucking collect some interest on it. So support adopt an artist today. That's what I'm gonna go with. Sweet. Welcome back, everybody. Yeah. Let's see. We got some points relating to attack actions being committal, whether that's committing to an attack or committing to blocking. Yep, absolutely. Oh yeah, some of our prehistoric games like Judge on Game & Watch's Judge is gonna be able to qualify under these rules, right? Neutral, advantage, disadvantage. Okay. Okay. How are we gonna define footsies? Man, we're talking footsies. All right, so high order factor, foozies. Game state rotates between. See, like, and okay, neutral, advantage, and disadvantage. Leads to concepts like pressure, momentum, okizeme, etc. Yeah, it's the concept of footsies, right? I joke, right? I joke, but seriously, footsies. Being able to choose the alternate color palettes, that's good. All right, so we have a few here, right? So what else do we have? Let me just scroll back up here. What else do we have? Got delaying the win condition. Here, drop them in. I'll take two more. I'll take a couple more suggestions here. If anyone else other than QTKO has got some ideas of like what are some core factors, lay them on us. Let's see if they either fit into something we've already created or if they're like worthy of their own. Insane lore. Ooh, okay. Deterministic outcome in interactions. Okay, I like that. Same action in same context provides the same result. Okay, something about I do like the idea of having having something about, yeah, mix-ups in mind games, the interplay between opponents, using the information and the the symmetrical information and the asymmetrical tools to play with each other's expectations to win your tug of war, right? Like, this is so that's it. I'm trying to like what is some good wording here then for that factor, right? Like, player reads is where my brain goes to immediately, But mind games? Yeah. Okay, let's go with that. Mind games, intimate competition. Using the symmetrical information and asymmetrical toolkits to subvert an opponent's expectations and win the tug of war and match. That's what I'm going with. Yeah, and like yeah. The rock paper scissors is definitely a component of that. Not sure how to articulate it. Want to put something to capture the action gaminess of fighting games here. Competitive Pokemon has most of the factors on the list here, including simultaneous and time-limited decision-making, but would not call it a fighting game. Ooh, fair. Active/fine control over player characters. Can be a single fighter or a team. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe competitive Pokemon is a fighting game, though. Yeah, well, the expansive move list definitely related to the multiple selected character with move lists. Unique tools that complement and contrast the other characters. Oftentimes very expansive, but not strictly so. See, so in terms of the time frame of it all, I think that would be under here. Limited rounds and limited timer, right? Fairly expansive, not restrictively small. Okay, I actually kind of like that. All right, we have our factors here. We have our high order factors. We have our low order factors. I am going to very, very quickly well, we're gonna see. I mean, like, we have a fair number of factors here. Those weren't all high order in my mind. But I would say... we're going to start here. Man, damn, are they? Are they, though? Let's start here, friends. High order factors. I think the head-to-head direct combat, using your tools to inflict reduced damage. Yeah, let's start with the list that we have and let's break it up. Right? Active, fine control over a player character, not indirect control. Yeah. I think that's fair. Mind games and intimate competition using symmetrical information and asymmetrical toolkits. We got zero sum. Clear win conditions. I can go with precise. All right, Kuro, thank you for joining so far. I appreciate it. I hope you check out the rest of the VOD and maybe enjoy a bit of a thought experiment later on. Man, I'm really ending up with just higher order factors. Like, I feel so many of these are so fundamentally important. Right? Like, I don't think I could remove the symmetrical information. I can't remove the multiple selectable characters. Okay, you know what? Here, I do have one. Super meters, resource management. Right? Maybe that's why fighting games are so unique and well-defined despite their diversity, because they have so many higher order factors. This, okay, like... That is one of the things I might be leaning towards. Health is absolutely a resource, right? It is. It is. I don't think... Right? Yeah. Combos, guaranteed, largely uninterruptible. Attacks. Can't really think of any other high order factors. Yeah, no, health is absolutely a resource, right? Is resource management Tools gated by meter. Requiring trade-offs to your game plan. Because, like, super meters, I will include HP in there, right? Honestly, yeah. System tools gated by meter requiring trade-offs for your game plan. Coming back from the shower, have you added something to the effect their abilities are kept behind a resource? Yes! I love that we're hitting all the notes, man. I love this. Yeah, even screen position is a resource in fighting games, right? But is it a high or low order factor? Are these intrinsically, right? Like, what is more important? And I'd say, looking at the factors that we have, things like this, right? Should this even be it? Should precise control over player characters be a higher order or lower factor? Honestly, it could be a low order factor when you consider that combos and this kind of resource management is also down there. Oh, dang it. I appreciate you letting me know about that. I thought I was hearing something. I thought it was just the playlist I had. Hopefully it's calmed down. I'm gonna have to check out my audio setup. Cause yeah. Man, it's been getting weird, dude. As a little bit of a side note, whenever I'm playing Fexel, I get this weird popping and dropout on my mic. I don't know why that's happening. Time to reinvestigate the audio. Combat mechanics into the low order factors as well, especially since S and K is part of the canon. That's a good one. Okay. Okay. Maybe something about the characters being different enough that it requires the players to specialize to an extent. You could have multiple selectable characters, but if it's too easy to switch between them... yeah, and I'm hopeful that the asymmetry unique tools that complement and contrast the other characters, I'm hopeful that that is strong enough to kind of accommodate for that. Yeah, Scream and cooldowns would also be considered a resource, right? And those are all things that I think are part of it. There's something about that determines, right? About this that determines whether or not you're a fighting game. But I think things like this are far more important, right? The zero-sum aspect is kind of foundational. It's also something that crosses over with many other genres, right? So it's not like it's exclusive to fighting games. None of these things have to be. But I think that this idea is things very, very rarely end up in a draw. And usually when it's a draw, it ends up in a tie-break situation. Sorry, just catching up with some of the chat here. As a Smash player, you'd say that unique to the genre, but it's low order. Platform and 3D fighters don't use SF-style 3D motion inputs. No, exactly. Which is why I think, once again, it is something that we very often go to. But this idea of special attacks is not required, and the idea of motion inputs is not required. But the idea that you have these unique toolkits in some fashion, that covers some of what we're talking about here, but this is also distinct enough that it kind of, I feel it deserves its own, right? But like, look, we still have a few more here, right? Like simultaneous, interruptible combat. I think we were on this as a bit of a, that matters. Right? I'm actually tempted to put the precise control over player characters down into low order. Yeah, I guess that's fair. When do they not have precise control? I mean, yeah. Yep. Okay, you pulled me back. You pulled me back. All right, how many we got here, friends? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 high order factors. 1, 2, 3, 4 low order factors. Do we have one more low order factor? I think 10 and 5 having 15, and I think you're right, QTKO, that we're one of the things we're finding is that these fighting games as a genre, it does a good job of being synthesized to a point that, or like condensed to a point that a lot of the factors that define it are very high order. I could see camera angle. Man, that might be my headphones doing that. I do, okay, yeah. You're right, there is something about the perspective of fighting games, right? In that it has to have both players visible at all times, and that falls under the symmetrical information. Yeah, right? Minimizing hidden information. I'm gonna say shared perspective. Yo, what's good, Mage? We're just wrapping up our list of factors here, man. We have a handful of things here, almost 14 right now. I think we're looking for a 15th to wrap this up. Factors that define video games. That these factors define fighting games as a genre, and that genre is represented by this lovely list of games right here. Glad you could make it. All right, so let's take it from the top and see if there's anything that's obviously missing here, right? Head-to-head direct combat, high order values. This is typically PvP, also PvE, using tools to inflict and reduce damage, whether it be blocking, whether it be throws, whether it be, you know, whatever the case may be. Variety of tools. You have precision control over your player characters. This can be a single fighter or a team, but you're always in charge, and like direct positioning and precise positioning is an important factor to consider. Mind games and intimate competition, using the symmetrical information and asymmetrical toolkits provided. All right, so we can put this down here. I'm putting that mind games right at the bottom. Right, it's a zero-sum game. One player wins, one player loses. There's a very clear win condition with limited rounds and a limited timer, right? You KO by health, by ring outs, by timeout, whatever the case may be. It could be a point system, but it is usually very clearly delineated. Symmetrical information availability and minimizing hidden information includes health values, super meter, right? And includes a shared perspective. I think that's important. Let's see. Multiple selectable character archetypes with asymmetrical movesets, unique tools that complement and contrast the other characters, oftentimes very expansive, definitely not restrictively small. Simultaneous, interruptible combat. You know, players can disrupt each other's actions. Super big, important part of it. Yeah, I have heard of treachery in Beatdown City, actually. There's some really interesting, like, brawler, beat-em-up adjacent stuff that do some cool stuff with fighting game dynamics. All right. We should be getting folks back from chat in just a second. Or from chat, from ads, from the ad break. Okay, but we're still going through these lists, right? So tug of war, deterministic outcomes and interactions, mind games, intimate competition, right? And then we have special attacks, motion inputs, resource management, super health meters, right? Super meters, stuff like that. Combos, sequential guaranteed, largely uninterruptible attacks. All right, so we got some of this stuff. And then comeback mechanics. Tool typically gained over time and by being on the losing end of a match. Of interactions, let's say, can be used to turn the tides of a round and keep the contest close. It's all right, Andrew. Thank you for making it out to the class. Have a lovely evening. I will catch you on the other side. have a lot of unique normal attacks, since not everyone is unique. Announcer's presentation, that's a good point, Guardian, right? There is something about that. I think we're missing a little bit something about the presentation of the genre, though we do have it under symmetrical information. What are you doing? All right. You know, I don't think we're not really coming to it. Yeah, variety of tools is important more than just in relation to archetypes. Okay. Multitude. It's a multitude. Multitude of meaningful and unique attacks. Yeah. Techniques. Yeah, that's good, right? Because can be system-wide or per character. Includes normal attacks, specials, installs, bursts, etc., etc. Yeah, right? Yeah, otherwise command lists wouldn't be a common occurrence. It is definitely... Yeah, normal attacks, unique attacks, specials, installs, bursts, but like the multitude of meaningful and unique techniques, right? Whether they come from a system-wide design or a per-character design. And then, but more importantly, we have that in some degree up here. But I think it is a better split there. That's an important distinction. I think you are correct. All right, friends, we have 15 factors now. We have 15 factors, and yay! We have this is okay. This counts. This is our basement interpretation. We'll call it the alpha version, right? We're workshopping it here, man. It's cool. But we're gonna have to put this to the test, right? We're gonna have to pick a game. So everyone in chat, man, think about a game. Think about a game that in your brain, yeah, now it's the fun part. Think about a game that is not in this list. Maybe it's a fighting game that you love, right? And play a lot. And we can look at that game through the lens of this interpretation. And you should probably think about a game that is not really a fighting game, right? My favorite go-to is something like Super Dodgeball for the Neo Geo. Or like I said earlier in the stream, Twinkle Star Sprites, right? Maybe you want to do DDR, right? We'll think about a couple games, and I think we're going to run those games against this interpretation to see how they stack up, in what ways, right? That is going to be our next step. So think on that, friends. Start discussing it in chat. Drop your suggestions. I'm going to be back in just 1 second as I top up my water and stay hydrated. And we are going to be back, and yeah, we're gonna put the Basement Interpretation through its paces. I think that's what we're gonna do. Welcome back, friends. We are at it here. It is time for the fun stuff. It is time to officially exclude your favorite game from fighting games as a genre. No, that is literally the not the thing. That is not the thing that we are about to do. No, I'm hopeful here, man. Like, we've done some good work here, friends. We have worked together. We have had a lovely discussion. We've agreed upon some foundational games in the fighting game genre. And we've figured out what about those games makes them fighting gamey. What do we like about them? What's important about them and the way they work and the way that they're presented. And now we're gonna pick some games, and we are gonna see if they're based on this framework. Where on the spectrum of fighting games? Because this is it, right? Like I said, this is not about excluding anything. Fighting games, like many things in our world, lie on a spectrum. Right? Some of them are more fighting gamey than others, but that does not mean they're not part of that spectrum, right? So we can figure out where they're placed on it, whether maybe that pushes it, in your personal opinion, into something fighting game adjacent. It's got some of the juice there, but not quite all of it. But these other things, man, no, shit, that's a fighting game, dude. I didn't realize it. So let us dig in here. Let's catch up on a little bit of what's been said. Proposed Lethal League and Splatoon, while Screamer Red Skull proposed Schwarzer Blitz and Halo. Some interesting overlap there. I think FPSs, I think music games, I think shoot 'em ups. There's some notable crossover here. Shmup versus games like Twinkle Star Sprites. Yes, Emmy, 100%. Okay, I agree. We're gonna do Twinkle Star Sprites. QTKO retracting Splatoon, TF2 because it's way more interesting. All right. Quake, Lethal League, Twinkle Star Sprites, TF2. DDR might want to propose that one too. DDR is also a good one. I would propose Super Dodgeball. Let's go to the list. All right. Yeah, let's write these down so we don't lose them. Fighting games? These are some interesting ones, absolutely. Whoops, let me do that. Hey, how'd you do that? All right, here we go. Hey, why are you doing that? You'd think I don't know how to format a Google Doc. Holy heck. All right, we got Quake. We got Twinkle Star Sprites. We have TF2. And we have, right, Lethal League. DDR. Schwarzer Blitz. Windjammers. Nidhogg. Resistance. 2040X. I like it. Great picks. So we got some first person shooters. We got a shoot 'em up. We got something on its own. We got a rhythm game. We got some indie games. All right. Are these fighting games? Guys, is Quake a fighting game? Is Quake head-to-head direct combat? Typically PvP, also PvE. Now, are we saying Quake 1? Or are we saying Quake Arena? I want to clarify. Screaming Red Skull, I believe you were the one who suggested Quake, right? Are we talking Quake Arena here? Because yeah, right? I would say Quake 1, this is going to be an important distinction. The one that had 1v1. I mean, there was definitely... What was the... Okay, Arena was my big, like, Quake multiplayer. Yeah, okay. We'll call it Quake Arena. We'll do the deathmatch multiplayer focused Quake. I think that's absolutely fair. I mean, it'll give it a little bit of an assist, basically, right? So, head-to-head direct combat, typically PvP. Yeah, it was primarily the multiplayer incarnation of it, right? Also has PvE, could also do bots and stuff like that, right? Using tools to inflict and reduce damage. That's the kind of core of it, right? Quake 3 Arena can be played on Sega Dreamcast and is therefore a fighting game. Oh, problems. Yo, we just bypassed the entire frickin' interpretation. Yes, I love it, Butler. Dreamcast had to be a fighting game. Right? You want to say that it's not a fighting game, right? Yeah, and this is it, right? So, right, I think that's actually a good way to approach this. Use this to check your preconceived notions. Man, taking this back all the way to our first FGC University stream. We talked about values, right? We talked about what the values of the fighting game community or fighting game player are, how we determine them, how we interpret them, all that good stuff. One of the things we talked about in that was that our value systems are self-correcting, or they're supposed to be, right? They're supposed to be a system that allows us to check ourselves periodically, to be like, and check itself, to be like, do my values continue to hold up? Or do they remain internally consistent, right? And so, yeah, like, based on my values and my understanding, I would say Quake is not a fighting game, right? But use this as a tool. The basement interpretation can be one of those tools you use to analyze and to self-correct and to, verify your values. And going through this with the eye is saying, no, it's not a fighting game, but what if it ends up being one, right? Be open to that when you're using these kinds of tools. That's how we're going to get to a more expansive understanding of fighting games. Yeah, mix Sonic Hero with Tag Fighter. I love it. Yes, Emmy. The UFC, WWE games, those are a very interesting set of games to look at it's through this lens as well, right? Okay, so Quake Arena, right? Head-to-head direct combat, precise control over player characters, can be a single fighter or a team. That lines up. Right? It's zero sum. One player wins, the other player loses, or one team wins, one team loses, as the case may be. I think that lines up. There's a clear win condition with limited rounds and a limited timer, right? KO by health, by ring out. It's all clearly delineated. Dude, this lines up for Quake, right? We have our health. We have symmetrical information availability, minimizing hidden information. Now, every character gets their own included perspective. You don't get to see someone else's ammo count. You don't get to see their health count. I think Quake fails on this, right? Symmetrical information availability, minimizing hidden information. I think fundamentally Quake Arena fails on this level. Right? But look, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have our symmetrical information. Doesn't quite line up. Multiple selectable character with archetypes and asymmetrical movesets. Not quite, right? You don't have multiple archetypes. You have skins, which aren't functional. You do have a multitude of meaningful and unique techniques and weapons that you can choose from, but that's a low order factor, right? So I think Quake here is failing on symmetrical information availability and multiple selectable characters and asymmetrical archetypes, right? Which are pretty foundational to what fighting games are. Right? Simultaneous interruptible combat, check on that one though, right? Players can disrupt each other's actions, right? There is, is there a tug of war game state, or is it more volley and positioning? Ooh, I'm curious what chat thinks on this. What do you guys think? Screaming Red Skull, you since I figure I'll throw this one to you, right? Right? The concept of neutral advantage, right? Can't shoot your gun if you get blown up, right? And so that's it, right? So yeah, you don't have that tug of war because you get gibbed, right? You're in the same state until you get gibbed, and then it's over. Right? There is definitely a level of like mobility and screen positioning and like movement and momentum and stuff like that, right? Like you can apply pressure, but I don't think there is that clearly delineated stance of neutral advantage, disadvantage, right? Like you get in fighting games. Yeah, right, yeah, because yeah, absolutely. Your footsies is moving in a way that dodges the shots. Did Quake have weapons you pick up? Yeah. Quake's time to kill? That's interesting. I mean, I would say pretty fast. I mean, you're not looking at StarCraft RTS levels of gameplay or MOBA levels of rounds and matches, but you're not at the 60 to 99 seconds times 3 that you are for fighting games. Yeah, you can grab new ones on the field, but you start with the same kit. Right? Which once again is why it fails the multiple selectable characters, right? Like, you do have, right, multitude of meaningful and unique techniques through those items, but it is not intrinsic to a character selection choice, right? Yeah, a match being around 10 to 20 minutes, that's, yeah, I was gonna peg it at 15, so that makes sense. Yeah, lower time to kill would affect the ability of a tug of war, right? Yeah, I am leaning towards a no on this. I think the state of play and the way the game rotates between game states and fighting games is different. Is so different than how it works in Quake Arena that I don't think you could do that. And the games do last longer. So while you do have a tug of war usually in points, right? It's once again, it's not as contained and immediate as much of the factors that are applying to fighting games are. So I think it misses out on the spirit of it in a way that would disqualify it, right? So, right, we have what? 1, 2, 3, right? 5 yeses, 3 nos. Deterministic outcomes. Yeah, same actions in the same context provide the same results. Check mark. Mind games, intimate competition, using symmetrical information, asymmetrical toolkits to subvert the opponent's expectations. That does work, right? Even if the tug of war isn't as important or isn't as notable as in fighting games, even if the symmetrical information isn't reduced as much, you do have this core intimate mind game competition using your toolkits to subvert the player's expectations. I think that is the core of this factor, right? So I would say it qualifies, right? So like that's a fair bit. Like that's over 50% of our higher order factors, right? We got what, 6 to 4 basically, 7 to 3. And then moving into our low order factors, right? There are other things. There are not combos to speak of, right? There are not special attacks and motion inputs to speak of. The resource management, the supers, the burst, the health. There is resource management, right? You do have health, you do have ammo. Like, this exists in some factor, but I would say is kind of diluted to the point where it is very low order, right? In terms of how much of a contributor is this to it being a fighting game, I think it misses that mark a little. Yeah, they do exist, right? So I could understand if I could see someone putting this there, right? And time as well. They are absolutely a factor. But once again, bringing this back to the top, right? No single factor is a qualifier or disqualifier. And I think its presence here as a low order factor doesn't really have a meaningful bearing on its classification as a fighting game, right? Yeah, it relates to how many high order factors there are and how strongly they define the game. Absolutely. Absolutely, right? So, and that's it, which is why when I say that nothing is qualifying or disqualifying is because within the idea of clear win conditions, right? You could be very, very in line with this factor or kind of just on the outskirts of it. So it may or may not be that important to your ultimate determination, right? But these things have a tendency to, right? And this is it, where I almost think that, like, missing a couple of these, the symmetrical nature of information and the asymmetrical nature of the movesets, I think those are kind of, like, notable things that pushes this away from being a fighting game. And, like, looking down, right? So, yeah, we have our mind games, we have our deterministic outcomes, but we don't have combos. We don't really have comeback mechanics, right? Take a quick moment as we wait for the ads to roll through. I just wanted to say again, everyone, thank you always for joining me here in the Digital Basement. I appreciate it. Yo, we hang out here as always. We got the Discord. Exclamation point Discord there in the chat if you wanted to come join us in the Digital Basement. Of course, I'm on Twitter. I'm so sad for all my Brazilian friends who might apparently... I mean, am I sad for them, or are they really the lucky ones that Twitter's disappearing? No, it's bad that artists who need Twitter for their livelihood and people who need Twitter to communicate might no longer have access to it in Brazil. That's all sorts of messed up. But on the bright side, Brazil, Twitter is kind of a garbage fire. So, but I'm in that garbage fire. Burn along with me at MrMKL_. And of course, dudes, the Patreon, I really appreciate it. If the best way to support me, honestly, is this Patreon here. For a couple bucks a month, you can help me do what I do around here in the Digital Basement. And it's cheaper than a Twitch sub, which, hey, I appreciate all my Twitch subscribers as well. It gets you the ad-free stuff. But you know what? If you wanted to go to the Patreon route, that's cool. It gets me just as much money for a little bit less for you. And I'll grant you the ad block absolution. If you happen to engage with an ad blocker and watch my stuff on Twitch, that's cool, right? You can do it there. Or you can check it out on YouTube, which I don't think there's any ads on YouTube for my stuff. And, you can use the Patreon here for a couple bucks a month, and it grants you ad block absolution. I will not hold it against anyone if you want to remove the hellscape that is the adverse on the internet. So, cool. But it does help support, so I'm gonna just throw it out there. So for Punk, one of the reasons Quake doesn't feel like a fighting game is because you're playing as yourself. From the camera angle, where the fighting games, you're controlling someone else from a different perspective. I think that's a really good point. I think that is a pretty fundamental aspect, which is why we have, right, amongst our high order factors, this symmetrical information, which most importantly, I think has a shared perspective. And I think when we're missing out on this and this, like these two things, I mean, like, I could reorder this list and literally put these 2 items at the top and have them be the only high order factors, and that will make total sense to my brain, right? So I think, once again, when you're thinking about these things, when you're going through this list, right? It's none of these are weighted in our list, and I think that's it. And it's gonna be when people make these judgments based on vibes, and that's what your brain is really doing. It's like you have these factors are kicking around in your brain somewhere, and when you see a game, your brain like cross-references all those things, and it weighs it differently. When you look at Quake, there are some things about it that make you weigh some factors differently than when you look at Power Stone, right? So I think that's a really interesting note from that punk there, just saying that, yeah, the way in which the game is presented fundamentally makes me lean away from it. So I think this is, yeah, we're fair when we're looking at these factors. When you don't have, we have very few of these low order ones, right? No special attacks, no meaningful resource management, no combos, no meaningful comeback mechanics, though you do have a multitude of meaningful and unique techniques. You have one low order factor, right? And you're missing some pretty fundamental high order ones. And you have other factors which are, while high order for fighting games, would also just be high order for first person shooters or other genres, right? We even had to look at the head-to-head direct combat nature of Quake 3 Arena in order to really get a justifiable look or a justifiable excuse to have it be head-to-head direct combat, right? So I think considering all this, right? Quake? Not a fighting game. But Twinkle Star Sprites. I don't know. Is Twinkle Star Sprites a fighting game? Right? It is a versus... Oops. It is a versus shmup. And we have a few things here immediately right off the bat that Quake doesn't have. This has a shared perspective. This has symmetrical information availability, right? This has very clearly laid out round structure, timer structure, health structure in a way that is, I don't know, I guess a little smeared and broader in a game like Quake. Yeah, and Toho, there were a bunch of Toho-style versus shoot-'em-ups as well, which I think would fall under this category, and you could look at them in the same light, right? Puzzle Fighter, absolutely. The Puzzle Fighter-style games are other ones that we can absolutely look at, right? So let's take a look through Twinkle Star Sprite. Twinkle Star Sprite is explicitly head-to-head direct combat, using tools to inflict and reduce damage. It's actually a little bit indirect combat, but it is definitely head-to-head and encompasses this stuff. So for me, I would say that this qualifies, right? Because you are shooting enemies coming onto your screen, much like in Puzzle Fighter, you are solving match puzzles in order to send garbage over to your enemy, and that is your method of attacking, right? You have very precise control over your characters. It is absolutely zero-sum. You have the clear win condition. It's all clearly delineated by these factors, right? You have your symmetrical information. You have a shared perspective. So this hits on some of the notes that Quake Arena definitely missed out on, right? You have multiple selectable characters, archetypes with asymmetrical movesets. right? You have different shot patterns, you have different things, and those are all selectable from the get-go, as opposed to being items that you can acquire during a match, right? Very, very distinct difference from how we were, from how Quake Arena operates, right? Simultaneous, yes. Interruptible, yes. You can send garbage. You can disrupt each other's actions. You can force another player to move from offense to defense based on the layout of their screen, based on what you are actively doing, right? This is very, very close, right? You have a tug of war. Game state. Does the game state rotate? Do you have footsies? Okay, so we've hit our first high order factor for Twinkle Star Sprites that I think doesn't quite line up, right? Much like Quake Arena, you don't really have distinct neutral advantage, disadvantage. You can have influence on them through this simultaneous interruptible nature, right? You can have multitude of meaningful and unique techniques that can be system-wide, like bombs or, right, unique special attacks, things that you could do, different patterns that you send. You have those factors. No footsies, but it has neutral advantage, disadvantage based on how clear your screen is. Ah, interesting. Okay. I like that. That's a good justification for it, right? You could probably also look at Quake Arena in a similar aspect, right? But I think, okay, but I could justify that at the very least on like kind of the light end, right? So this would be one of those factors that is not like one of the absolutely, it's not going to be one of the factors that pushes you over the edge, but it's obviously a component that it has. Okay. Deterministic outcomes, yep. Same action provides the same kind of results. Right? Using the symmetrical information to twist versus player expectations, win tug of war match. Yeah, if you can be smart enough to use your resources, right? That's partly down to resource management. It's going to have that. Yeah, MEK, yeah. So yeah, that's it. There are versions, right? And this is where you get into the, is it fighting game or is it fighting game adjacent, right? Because yeah, when you have like lateral uses of some of these features or some of these factors, you can get, like, it's not a fighting game, but it's close to it. It embodies it, right? And this is the kind of interesting thinking that when you're looking, if you're a game designer, when you're looking at features and factors in your own game, to then say, oh, it is not a fighting game, but it's trying to achieve the same thing that fighting games are. So how do fighting games use those tools, and how can I better leverage them to achieve the type of game that I'm looking to create? Yeah, right? Something about the direct aspect of it, right? And this is what I set up here, right? Direct combat. Twinkle Star Sprites kind of fails on the direct combat. The puzzle fighters of the world kind of fail on the direct combat aspect of it. Right? And so I think this is what we're finding. Yes, look, Twinkle Star Sprites has this in a lateral way. Twinkle Star Sprites has this. Twinkle Star Sprites has this, right? Cool, that's 2 of them. 3 of them has this in a lateral way. It's not quite as explicit or as expansive, but it importantly has this shared perspective, right? The multiple selectable characters. It does have that, but once again, not quite as expansive as most fighting games in our canon, right? Where our Street Fighters of the world, our KOFs of the world, have foundationally different characters working within the same system, and much broader tool sets when you look at things like Virtua Fighter and Tekken, right? So while Twinkle Star Sprites does seem to have a lot of these high order factors, they're working in kind of lateral ways sometimes, right? You can disrupt each other's actions. They're interruptible, but this kind of like tug of war, the rotation, the direct impact, it's all kind of, I mean, and once again, not worse, but not presented in the same way, not focused on in the same way, right? These deterministic outcomes are very important. The mind games are also there, but once again, considering your limited toolkits, considering that the tug of war isn't as important, considering that it's indirect, messing with your opponent's expectations, they're much better off memorizing the pattern that's going to come at you, and you being able to alter that pattern is a much more limited tool. So, right, it kind of fails on the mind game aspect. It kind of fails on the selectable archetypes and on the head-to-head direct. So, but they're there, and a lot of them are there. And then when we move down to the low order factors as well, sure, you have special attacks, but not really tied to motion inputs. Yeah, you do have resource management. This is absolutely there. Combos are technically a thing, but it's not really sequential guaranteed uninterruptible attacks. This functions much more like Quake would, right? Same with the comeback mechanics with your bomb and the multitude of meaning, right? So like these kinda sorta are there, but also kinda sorta fail in the same way Quake does. So when we're looking at this comparatively, right? Sure, we have 2 of them, that's great, they're low order. Sure, we have 6 of them, but 2 of them are really only super clear, right? But I think important enough, and there's enough of them present in interesting lateral ways, that fighting game adjacent is where I end up classifying something like Twinkle Star Sprite, right? All right, let's pick here. Let's pick 2 more out of this list, friends. What do we like? Which 2 other games should we do? I would kind of like to do either Nidhogg or Resistance 2040X. But something lateral, like a TF2, Lethal League, or DDR, that could be kind of interesting as well. Nidhogg. I do love me some Nidhogg. You'll vote for Lethal League over another shooter? Bring in your votes here, chat. Bring in your votes. We'll take a couple seconds. Stay hydrated, friends. I'm gonna grab myself a drink. What do we like? We've already looked at a shooter, like an FPS. We've looked at a shmup, a versus shmup. And I think Twinkle Star Sprite would probably have a lot of great crossover, an important crossover with the various puzzle fighters, like Super Puzzle Fighter and God, I am blanking. Magical Drop, Puyo Puyo, that kind of stuff, right? I think there's a lot of interesting there. And hey, important note. Thank you, QTKO. Thank you for that. Twinkle Star Sprites feels like a mystery tournament game. And we have talked about how so many of these fighting game adjacent games are amazing mystery tournament games. Like, they're just phenomenal mystery tournament games. And it's because they are so closely tied to fighting games. So many of the things they do, the head-to-head nature of it is very important, right? But there's also this element of, and I think this is one of the factors that probably some of our factors need a revision going forward, I would say, if only to incorporate some of that technical aspect of fighting games. I don't think we captured that enough, right? Where there is a certain amount of execution that is prized in fighting games and that is fundamental to our canon games, right? And it is an aspect that you will see in many fighting game adjacent games like Twinkle Star Sprites. The ability for movement. It lines up with Quake Arena. It lines up with DDR. It lines up with Guitar Hero, right? So there is a lot of potential for those kinds of games, and why you find them there regularly, right? Tori Bash is in mystery tournaments. Whatever, the Money Exchange puzzle game is in mystery tournament. Like, there are so many of these games. Power Stone ends up there all the time. Like Arena Fighters, right? Like, there's there's a lot to be said about that crossover, and I think some of the execution is definitely part of that. Okay, I think I like DDR and Nidhogg because I think there's Nidhogg and Resistance. There's an obvious connection. I think we could probably bang these out together. And then I think DDR is an interesting one because I want to get a rhythm game in here because I think there is a fundamental connection between rhythm gamers and fighting gamers. There is a crossover, my friends. Rhythm games, fighting games, speed games, like something about puzzle games, something about these genres hit on the same notes. And I will say, for me, it's that like state of flow. Very few genres can get you into a state of flow that like I am beyond actively thinking about it. My muscle memory has taken over and you make decisions without thinking. Your brain is perfectly in sync with your body, that kind of stuff, right? Puzzle games, rhythm games are excellent at that, right? Fighting games do an amazing job at that as well. And so I think that's one of the reasons. This is the perfect fodder for an amazing Venn diagram. Absolutely, right? And this is it. If you go to a speedrun event, every speedrun event I've gone to, I'm speedrunning next to fighting game people that I compete with at tournaments. And every arcade that I go to and play some rhythm games, I see the BlazBlue player there, right? Playing DDR. Or, whatever, fucking Hatsune Miku Megamix, right? Like, stuff like that. The people playing Puzzle Bobble are also the ones playing fucking Foosball, who are also playing Guitar Hero, who are also playing Guilty Gear, right? Like, it is an amazing Venn diagram, right? And it's the connection of some of these factors, which means that there is such a crossover between those communities. Okay, so let's do DDR first. I think that's going to be a cool one, and then we'll end on Nidhogg and Resistance 2040X. All right. So is DDR head-to-head direct combat? We might need a Venn diagram so we could put games on how fighting game adjacent they are. I would love to see that circle. Absolutely. Yeah, shooters can be in that diagram for flow-based games as well, 100%. One-on-one? Yo, some of those basketball games, man, hoops is like... There's some real fighting game stuff in that shit, for sure. Yo, also feed the content mill, yeah. No! Discussion, not discourse! No, but I'll feed the content mill, that's cool. All right. Yo, DDR, is it head-to-head? Is it direct combat? Is it typically PvP, but also sometimes PvE? Not really. Are you using tools to inflict and reduce damage? Not really. Yo, yeah, QTKO, that's where we're going after this, man. We're going on, what is the opposite of a fighting game? Invert all these factors. What is the anti-fighting game? For sure. Don't let Twitter tell you it's Overwatch. They'll probably tell you it's Overwatch. All right. So we're going through, right? DDR. It's not head-to-head. It's not direct combat. You're not really using those tools. You don't have precise control over a character, right? It is responding to a series of notes, like a note chart. Is it zero-sum? I don't think it is. If you're playing next to someone in DDR, if they fail out, you just keep playing, right? So it's not this, and it's not that, and I'm pretty sure it's not this either. Is there a clear win condition, limited rounds, limited timer? I mean, there is a very clear win condition. There is something akin to to a health bar, and it is clearly delineated, but like, it's not rounds. It's not a limited timer. It is just there are set times for your tracks, right? So like, I mean, at best, we're looking at a weak connection on this for a high order factor. Yeah, Guitar Hero Rock Band might have been, yeah, and this is it. Because I think I don't think people would differentiate between Rock Band and DDR as rhythm games. But looking at them through this perspective, they are pretty different, right? But look, so I think weak connection at best on this, right? Symmetrical information availability, minimizing hidden information, shared perspective. Yeah, this is all there, right? You don't really have any super meters, but any info that you have is readily available. All the note charts are very clearly listed, unless you're playing at hidden mode, right? Like, and there's even a shared perspective. Like, it's usually a shared cabinet screen. So, like, it hits this, but is this important? Like legitimately, right? Like, it's technically there. I don't think it matters that much. This is a weird one, right? And this is where the vibes come into it, where I'm just like, I'm looking at it and I'm just like, yeah, it's on the tin. But like, it's like artificial lemon flavor. It's lemon-ish, right? There's no character select in DDR. There is no multiple selectable characters with asymmetrical movesets. Unique tools that complement and contrast each other, right? It's not there. Simultaneous interruptible? Is there? I'm actually not sure. I need a DDR fan to clarify. Can you send garbage to people in DDR? Can you send garbage notes? Some version has to let you do it. There has to be a competitive mode in DDR somewhere, right? But I don't think you can really meaningfully disrupt another player's action. There's not really any of this. No neutral advantage, no tug of war, no pressure, momentum, okizeme. Deterministic outcomes? Sure, but once again, in the context of all these other things being missing, how meaningful is that? Are there mind games? Not really. You have so little of this symmetrical information, the asymmetrical stuff, right? There are no real special motion inputs, though there is this element of execution, which once again I feel is now a glaring omission from our list. Right? There's minor resource management. There's combos, but it's not really geared towards attacks or the head-to-head nature of it. It is simply chains that allow you to get a higher score, which I think is another fundamental difference when we start looking at what are these games doing, what are the goals, right? There's no real comeback mechanics to speak of. And, right, these meaningful choices. DDR is not a fighting game. But it is somehow fighting game adjacent. Whoops. Whoops. I'm in the wrong one. There we go. Here's where we are. Right? So DDR, it's not a fighting game. But somehow adjacent? Right? Are we missing a factor? Right? Is execution, dexterity a part of it? Right? Is it state of flow that you achieve while playing? Right? There are some elements of this that do add to it. Yeah, one-on-one PS1 usually does the trick to fighting. So it's a bit of an odd one, right? Like, because it misses so many of these factors in meaningful ways. But we end up down here, and like, I think there's an undeniable connection between DDR players and fighting game players. So I think this is interesting, right? Like, so many factors and in meaningful ways. Yeah, that visual tug of war, right? You have no meaningful movement on your character on screen towards your opponent. This is something that, once again, Andrea Demetrio was talking about this in the Digital Basement Discord, where for them, two of the key points is that there's this side view camera that keeps all players in view at the same time, right? So that's symmetrical information, no split screen, no two displays required. And there's prominent visible life bars, right? Residual health indicators of some sort on both players occupying a significant portion of the screen. Those two aspects and the way that they are presented are so fundamental for Andrea, an individual who makes fighting games, that like, yeah, and you're missing that from this, right? But it still has some of these other things that kind of hit the mark in some weird ways that still make it feel spiritually connected. Yes, and yeah, Screaming Red Skull, absolutely. And this is it. If you want to kind of like stretch the definition, right? Which, fine, but like we don't want to stretch it to the point of like suspicion, right? But I think that, yeah, there is a bit of like, yeah, you can consider yourself as the unique character, but so much of the aspects of what fighting games are doing and the reason that it's there as a factor is because it is an intrinsic part of the game. You have this character select, you have this, you are selecting the archetype and embodying their tools and toolkits. Ads should be going up for everyone at the same time. Woo. But like, it's less fighting games the more we delve into DDR and move competitive rhythm and more competitive rhythm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it, where it's like, look, excellent, welcome back. Things get categorized as fighting game adjacent, not necessarily because of these factors, right? Like, these factors aren't necessarily determining that something is fighting game adjacent. It might simply be adjacent because it is a like technically demanding genre that can be very competitive, and therefore there is a lot of crossover between the community and not so much that there is crossover between the games, right? And once again, this is a distinction that is not without a difference, right? Like, Smash Brothers is a fighting game. Smash Brothers might not be fighting game community. Like, I don't think the Smash Brothers is necessarily the FGC, right? But Smash Brothers is 100% a fighting game. But there's something about the Smash community that sets itself apart in terms of its values and what it does and how it operates, that works differently from the fighting game community writ large. And I think that's kind of a similar distinction that we get here with the fighting game adjacent, right? It's like, it's adjacent not because of these factors on the game design, but because some crossover within the community and some drive to play a competitive game, right? And that is what exists and creates that crossover, right? So important thing, right? Once again, it's like, not all fighting game adjacent games are created equal. But I like this, right? So DDR, right? Not a fighting game, somehow adjacent to it. Something about these factors, something about the way that they're weighted, something about maybe one of the missing factors that we have, something about execution and dexterity, or perhaps it's more of a crossover of player base as opposed to genre. Players, yeah, community members cross over due to competitive and mechanically demanding nature, right? Which is not enough to make it a fighting game, but is enough to connect you to fighting games. All right, we're gonna do one more here. We're gonna do one more, friends. And honestly, I really hope that y'all take this and start applying it to other things. I want to see it, man. Next time you play a game that makes you be like, oh, I dig this like I dig Street Fighter, or I dig this like I dig Eternal Fighter Zero, ask yourself why, right? And maybe this list can illuminate some of the reasons why and some of the connections that you can make, right? Next time you see a mystery game, guys, say to yourself, why the fuck is this in a fighting game mystery tournament, right? And some of these factors are going to pop up as reasons why they're there. All right, Nidhogg. Whoops. Let's take a quick look at Nidhogg. It is a fencing game, friends. Immediately, right off the bat, we seem to have interesting movesets. We seem to have a shared perspective. We seem to have head-to-head combat. And this is a game that I 100% believe in my core is... I'm like, it's a fighting game. Like when I vibe, when I'm just like purely talking on vibes, Nidhogg's a fighting game, right? But does it line up? It is explicitly a tug-of-war kind of game, right? Right? Look, when that came up as a point of conversation, right? Look, very clear win condition. When that came up, the tug-of-war aspect of it, cutie, like, that was like, I'm like, oh shit, yeah, man, that is absolutely one of the reasons why I, in my heart of hearts, believe that Nidhogg is a fighting game. So let's take it to the top one last time. One last time for the day, friends. And again, I appreciate you joining me here in FGCU for another lovely class. Is Nidhogg a head-to-head direct combat game? Yes, it is. You use various tools to inflict or reduce damage. You have a parry, you have a block, you have a bunch of things that you could do. You have very precise control over your player characters. It's a single fighter in this case. So we're 2 for 2, man. We're 2 for 2. It's zero sum. One player wins, one player loses. Absolutely. We're 3 for 3. It's got a clear win condition. It's a single round game. You can make it other rounds as well. You can set it up. You can set up a timer, though it's not by default. And this is one of the interesting things about games like Nidhogg, and in fact games like Smash Brothers, which is why I feel that Nidhogg is right at home in the fighting game. Because if we look at our fighting game canon, and we look at some of the important things that those games do, one of those games, if you'll notice, is Smash Brothers. And it does a lot of things differently from the way that most traditional fighting games do. But it is there, man. And Nidhogg definitely pulls from it, right? So, yeah, one player wins, one player loses. You have a clear win condition. Smash Brothers uses multiple formats for combat. And so, well, yes, the base game does not necessarily have limited... It does have limited rounds, doesn't have a limited timer, doesn't have KO, doesn't have anything like that. But you can die and lose progress by falling through object hazards, right? Everything is very clearly delineated, and you basically have a 1-point KO. So I would say mid-range on this, though, but like this lines up pretty well with fighting games, especially when you consider Smash Brothers being one of our canonical fighting games. Symmetrical information. Yup. Minimizing hidden information. Yup. Info includes health values and super meter. Yup. You have a shared perspective. Absolutely. Do you have multiple selectable character archetypes and asymmetrical movesets? No. Everyone is the same, right? There are variants that you can apply, much like in Smash Brothers, that will alter the type of combat or the various utilities you have, but they are not intrinsically character tied, right? We don't have that going to character select, picking someone who has a distinct moveset that like compares and contrasts with another character's distinct moveset, right? So we are missing out on that, right? So definitely kind of unfortunate. But once again, what are our canonical fighting games? And Street Fighter 1 is up there. And Street Fighter 1 is a game that in its head-to-head capacity also does not have any of that differentiation. So it is not, I don't say it's exclusionary, but it's definitely not helping the case, right? And this, thank you, QTKO. We want to talk about Nidhogg and Resistance 2040X in the same breath, as we should. They are very similar in many ways. Part of where 2040X makes it more fighting gamey is by having these explicitly different, selectable, unique characters, right? Like that is, it takes that at its core. It also incorporates combos in a very explicit way that does not happen. It also has special attacks with motion inputs in a way that, you know, Nidhogg doesn't quite hit, but we're going to get there in a second. Right? But absolutely. Whereas Nidhogg doesn't really hit this, but isn't really excluded by it, Resistance 2040X hits this and is included by it because of the way that it focuses this aspect within its design, right? You do have simultaneous interruptible combat. That's absolutely there. It is literally, Nidhogg is literally, and Resistance, they are literally tug-of-war fighting games. Like, you start on a screen, you KO your opponent, whether through health or single hit, whatever the case may be, right? As soon as you KO them, you have control to push the screen to an end goal or a finish line, right? And then the other player, when they respawn, coming in respawning, not unlike how Smash Brothers works. You see how our canonical games influence other games in the genre, right? This is fucking great, man. Look, it's all lining up. It's all coming up Millhouse, right? So 2040X does that in a much more explicit way, but you have this tug of war, a literal tug of war, where you have a very clear neutral, where you're in the same screen and you're fighting for it. You have the advantage where you're pushing. You have disadvantage where you're coming in. You have Okizeme. You have this sense of pressure. You have this sense of momentum that becomes very important. Games like Nidhogg and Resistance 2040X actually plays with the idea of momentum very important, like very well and very clearly. We're using more KOs, basically increasing the pace of play and determining how fast your respawn timer is. That is an amazing aspect that really, really plays up this tug-of-war rotation between game state, right? Very, very fighting gamey. Very, very deterministic. Same actions provide, in the same context, will provide the same results. Mind games and intimate competition is 100% there. These are strong aspects, the symmetrical information. The asymmetrical toolkit, right? Not so much in Nidhogg, definitely in Resistance. But this ability to use your tools to subvert the opponents and engage in this tug of war, 100% there, man. We're hitting pretty much all of the high order factors for Nidhogg and Resistance 2040X, right? Low order factors. Sure, Nidhogg does have, abilities which are tied to inputs, but they are not really special attacks, right? You have rolls, you have parries, you have defensive options. Those are all aspects, but they're low order factors and they're not there in the same, way that special moves and motion inputs are connected in fighting games, right? Your resource management, it's pretty low. You don't really have, right? Your resource is, are you armed in Nidhogg versus are you not? But once again, this is played up way more in Resistance 2040X versus Nidhogg, where you do have, health to manage as a resource. That's a much more fundamental part of Resistance, right? Same with combos. You have moves and follow-ups, but you don't have these sequential guaranteed options in Nidhogg. You definitely have them in Resistance, right? Comeback mechanics, I mean, there's a little bit of this in the more times you've been KO'd in Resistance, the faster your respawn is. That's a little bit there, but it's on the light end. Like, there's not a super strong tie to comeback mechanics in either Nidhogg or Resistance, right? And then once again, the multitude of meaningful, unique techniques. This is available. This is here in both Nidhogg and Resistance, and to a much greater degree in Resistance 2040X. No, it makes you have to fight. It locks the screen, and you must KO your opponent in order to be able to push the screen forward. That's actually one of the ways in which it, like, look, it kind of subverts the typical round structure of fighting games. Oh, no, wait, you're right. You can book it. Is it? Oh, damn. Yo, it has been a minute. Sorry, it has been a minute since I've played Nidhogg. There are ways to lock the screen, though, aren't there? Or is it only on round start? Ah, after the starting screen. You're right. You're right. Ooh. But you have the ability. So if somebody jumps over you and books it, if you run the opposite way from where they came and go off screen, it'll immediately respawn you at the start. So, like, you can create your own, your own corner by, like, screen wrapping, basically, right? So there is that, once again, that ties heavily into the tug-of-war dynamic. But you're absolutely right that, unlike where Resistance 2040X has a very explicit, it locks, you can still kind of sort of nudge the screen, but it largely locks it when someone respawns and you have to earn the move forward. It is just on round start that happens in Nidhogg. Oh, thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that, Screamin'. But then yes, then if you die at the same time, if you double KO, it does lock the screen again. So there are ways to get back into that, but it's situational. But once again, I think that's a very important thing to note when you're thinking about these games. How are these systems working and how do they line up or not with some of these factors, right? But look, we have a lot of these, man, right? We have these meaningful techniques. We have, for Resistance, we have combos. We have a lot of mind games and intimate competition. We have these deterministic outcomes. We have a very, very heavy tug-of-war influence. It's all simultaneous and interruptible. We're hitting on all these, man. It's zero sum. You have precise control, head-to-head PvP using these various tools. We're in fighting game territory, right? I'm going out there and come at me, bro. Fighting game. Resistance 24X. Even more of a fighting game than Nidhogg. And I think that is absolutely fair, right? We have hit on so many of these factors, and they are so fundamental to how the games work, and they line up so closely. Remember, a genre is represented. Let me start that one again. A genre is represented by its canon, right? And so, if that genre can also be represented by another game, it must line up with that canon well enough to be considered a fighting game. And right, and like looking at our list of games that we've gone through here, right? Like Quake definitely doesn't. The genre of fighting games is not represented by Quake. The genre of fighting games is kind of represented by Twinkle Star Sprites, but not really, right? The genre of fighting games, while there's some crossover, is not represented by DDR. I think it is very well represented by Nidhogg. It does so in some lateral ways, but those are also some lateral ways that have been explored by games like Smash Brothers, by games like Soul Calibur, which could easily have been a canonical game with its ring-outs, right? Nidhogg is a very fundamental ring-out kind of game. And all those other games that line up and can be equally well represented by the genre and by these factors, right? Games like World Heroes and its tug-of-war dynamic, there are these, very, very appreciable connections between those games and a game like Nidhogg, which I would say makes it a fighting game. And then Resistance doubles down on those factors, making it even more fighting gamey, despite still branching off in another direction, right? Which is why I am once again bringing this right back up to the top, okay? This game can be used to determine how fighting game-like a game is. Missing some points does not mean the game is not a fighting game. Likewise, possessing some points does not make it a fighting game. We are using this as a tool to expand our understanding of the genre and broaden its scope, as well as better understand the history of fighting games and the genre, right? And I think that's what this does. Like, this kind of framework is not something that prevents a game that is valuable and that is like a great contribution to the genre from being in the genre, but it helps us better understand how it fits on the spectrum of the genre, right? And once again, this does nothing to take away the elements of Quake that fighting game players appreciate. It does nothing to take away the elements of DDR that fighting game players appreciate. It does not even mean that these games are not related to fighting games as a genre in some way. But they're not fighting games. Whereas Nidhogg, what it does, the way it does it, the way it engages with these factors, even though it is very, very different from our canonical games, right? Like, you could look at Nidhogg and not necessarily say Street Fighter 2 or Darkstalkers or Mortal Kombat or Tekken or any of those things. But Nidhogg is doing all the things that made us say a fighting game is this. Which I think is beautiful, man. I think that is super informative, and I think that only helps expand the scope of what's possible from this genre. And I am so, so excited. Every time I see an indie developer, right? And this is why I wanted to make this. Guys, like, honestly, every time I see an indie developer do something new and interesting with their game, every time I see one of them say, what if I have a meter system that pops bubbles out of enemies when they get hit, right? Street Fighter gave you meter when you hit your opponent for super. That's part of fighting games. What if they pop out? Smash Brothers is also part of fighting games. They have coin battles, where part of your win condition is collecting coins. What if Murfight has super meter bubbles that you can collect to get resources? Ooh, that's really cool, right? That's a lateral way to think about it that you might not get to just looking at Street Fighter, but looking at what Street Fighter does and the way it does it, that's a really interesting twist and very in line with what it does. Ninja is a fighting game because it has burst. Bless you, punk, right? Ninja is one of the games, friends, that brought this all up, right? Like, oh, it's not gonna find. It's gonna bring up ninja stuff. I need ninja game, right? Here we go. Here we go. We're throwing it up here. But Ninja is kind of a platform fighter, kind of not, kind of a fighting game, kind of not, kind of a party game, kind of not. It's got a little bit of Smash Brothers in its DNA. It's got multiple different selectable characters with unique archetypes. They have special moves. They have a multitude of tools. They have things like burst. They have meter management. Do they have meter management? They don't have meter management. They have block management, but they have all these things. They have like the execution nature of the game, right? The head-to-head nature, the symmetrical information, right? All of these aspects, which are very, very important to fighting games, as we have found out during this conversation, now they're presented in this unique lateral way, right? Blocks are a bit of a resource. They all have different tools, different mechanics around them, different utilities, right? That's something that Quake was doing, but Quake didn't amount to a fighting game, right? But the way that Ninja handles those features, no, you are unable to hit your opponent without using blocks. And that is one of the fundamental differences, which, like you said, once again, no single factor is disqualifying. There is less direct interaction, but look at everything you can do and the amount of interaction that you have and the ways in which you can force your opponent and like be interactable and interruptible. I think that's it. The interruptibility of Ninja trumps its lack of direct interaction, right? And combining those factors makes you go fighting game, right? But like, look at these, like the systemic nature of fighting games, which is another factor that could easily be included on our list, right? You have multiple complex systems that all work and intertwine in various ways, and both players are able to independently exert their will on it, right? This is like something that's interacting with a bunch of the different factors that we've talked about. And it's like, if you wanted to like sum up a single line, you can do that by combining a handful of these high order factors and how they interact with each other, right? You could say to yourself, oh, that is, right, like those are enough things combined to provide you with like a very clear one-line definition of what they are, what a fighting game is, right? Yeah, you can counter the blocks, the interruptibility, the interaction, the way it works, the pressure, the okizeme, the respawn, all of those things are there. There's a very much a state of neutral, right? Not as clearly delineated as most fighting games, but it is there. And I think in combination with all of the other factors about Ninja that make it a game, make the game itself, right? Those line up really well with the factors for the Basement Interpretation. And those are very well represented in similar ways to how our canonical games are represented by those factors, right? And I think that's it, right? It's like, a lot of people will look at lists like this and say, missing this, missing that, not a fighting game. Has this, has that, is a fighting game. It's not that clear cut, but when you have to take it back. What is the game? How does it line up with these factors and in what ways? And how well does that game represent those factors compared to how our canon represent those factors, right? And I think with a generous understanding of how fighting games work and how broad the genre really truly is, you get stuff like Nidhogg very clearly being a fighting game. You get stuff like Ninja, in my mind, very clearly being a fighting game. And I'm doing it. I am adding Ninja. Heck yeah. It's a fighting game. Right? Like, this is so good, right? So yeah, very much like Lethal League in that sense, which is why I find, right? And I'm not going to go through Lethal League right now, but what I hope someone does actually, if I'm going to give out another assignment, I'm going to be handing out fucking workbooks at this rate, man. Take one of the games that we haven't talked about here, right? Take Windjammers, take Lethal League, take Team Fortress 2, and run it through its paces against this list that we have created, right? How does it line up with these factors? What is that game doing in regards to those factors? And how do they represent the genre, much like our canonical games here represent that genre, right? And I would love to see what you folks come up with, saying, okay, this is Lethal League, this is what it does, this is how it works. Fighting game, yay or nay, right? Is it adjacent? Why is it adjacent, right? I think one of the most fascinating things for me is that we were really like, oh, I get why music games are fighting game adjacent writ large, but are not fighting games. And they're not fighting game adjacent in the way that I expected them to be. I think that's the coolest thing. I didn't think DDR was a fighting game, but I didn't realize that it wasn't a fighting game for these reasons, right? And it makes me think about other games that maybe are more or less like fighting games, or like, and reasons why I like them. Like, why is it that I am obsessed with with like Megamix, and I'm obsessed with Us, and I'm like, and Uwenden and these games, and I get the same satisfaction out of them as I get out of fighting games, but not necessarily for the same reasons. And so like there's a spiritual connection there, but there's not a design connection necessarily, right? Not in this holistic sense where other games like Nidhogg very much are lining up in terms of a design paradigm, right? I would love to see that, man. Yes, absolutely. Run it by people who are knowledgeable about other genres. Ooh, that's a good one. Find your fucking competitive Call of Duty player. Who do you know who likes competing in, I don't know, man, Heroes of the Storm? Is that still a game? Do people still play Heroes of the Storm? Whatever, right? Like, get your favorite MOBA person. Get a chess player to look at chess through this. Get a Tetris player. Get a Tetris player to look at the game through this lens. Like classic Tetris, man. It's kind of fighting gamey, but it's kind of not. Is it fighting? Is it not a fighting game for the reasons we think, right? Is it more like a fighting game than we might expect? I would love to see what people who are super knowledgeable about their own respective genres feel when they kind of look through their games from this lens. Oh, this has been absolutely fantastic, friends. Yo, I think we have achieved something pretty cool here, right? This is, and once again, I'm saying it again because it needs to be said. This is not here, and I am not here to be the arbiter of what a fighting game truly is, right? If you don't know me by now, you have to know that I am a big tent dude. We are sitting here under the umbrella tree that is fighting games, and every one of them is important. Oh my god, did I get... Yo, Twitch, where is my notification? Where is my heads up about getting hit with the ad block right as I'm doing my sign off? All right. A dance for anybody who's still here as we're waiting for the ad break to end. I will say thank you, as always, for joining us here in the basement. I hope you enjoy my absolutely painful white man dancing. Oh man. But yeah, this has been great. This has been really fun. I am glad we were able to. Honestly, it has helped me think about the games that we play a little bit more, right? I'm not not trying to be the arbiter of the Toyota National Sales Event. I'm definitely not. Toyota does not pay me anything at all. I mean, I guess technically they're paying for like that's got to have been like 0.7 cents in ad rev. Fucking, I'm raking it in, man. Yo, the influencer life is paying off for me. Like, share, and subscribe. Hit me up on my Patreon. Bits in chat. Don't forget to use your Prime sub. Fuck Jeff Bezos. No, for real. This is great. Like, and I think that the basement interpretation has allowed me to kind of, I think, refine some of my views on why I like some of these games. Like, just going through this conversation in the back of my head, I'm like, yeah, man. I'm like, Tetris isn't a fighting game. Like, in my head, I kind of like, they're in the same bucket. They're in the same bucket of things that I love, but they're not the same, right? And I think this has like helped me tease out why I like them, but also why I like them for different reasons, right? And I think if you if you go into a game, I saw a lot of people pick up 2XKO and not be happy with their experience with 2XKO. I saw a lot of people really love it, don't get me wrong. But some people were like, what is wrong with this game? Why is it doing this, right? And I think they went in there with a certain set of expectations about what they want out of a game and what this game was doing. And it was a mismatch, right? And viewing a game through this kind of lens helps you determine which of those aspects actually matter to you and actually might let you enjoy the game a little bit more, right? People talk about, I don't like high execution games. I can't play KOF. Also, jump in, normal, special. Like, if you do that, you're still playing KOF, man, right? What is it about the game and what is it doing that you're liking? And you might find that some of these games are actually games that you really enjoy, right? It was one of the reasons that I, for one, really took to Fantasy Strike, where Fantasy Strike said, we're focusing on this. And I was like, you know what? I actually really like that. I like the kind of messy, guessy, play with, opponents' expectations, that mind game aspect of it. That was really cool. In a limited space that reduced some of the, mental strain and the mental stack requirements of the genre, which could oftentimes prevent me from hitting that, state of flow. What is it about that game that did it? I love versus style games and high flying, the hyper fighter shit, right? So why would I play Fantasy Strike, an approachable, grounded, much slower pace, right? And then I was like, oh, you know what? I actually like the frantic neutral of Marvel vs. Capcom. Fantasy Strike has some pretty frantic neutral. It happens really fast. Walk speeds are very fast. Decision making happens very fast, right? You have like, it's best of 7 rounds. You have all these rounds. You have limited health exchanges, but multiple rounds. Combos are short, so it happens a lot. Happens really fast. That was the aspect of it. I liked that frantic aspect of, I got hit, my character's dead, I have an incoming interaction, that's cool. Fantasy Strike gave it to me by doing, I got one hit into a knockdown, I get Okizeme, I got one hit into a knockdown, the round's over, we got a new round, and we get 4 more, right? And like, would I say to someone who is a Marvel fan, you'll love Fantasy Strike? No, but looking at Marvel through this lens and Fantasy Strike makes it very clear that there are aspects of Fantasy Strike that appeal to me. And so for me, I've always talked about how 3D fighters are a blind spot for me. So this is what I'm going to do. This is my assignment, my FGCU assignment to myself is actually, and I'd recommend this for anyone else too. Pick a fighting game that you don't necessarily jive with. Like maybe it's a game you bounced off of, right? Like Guilty Gear is a game that I bounced off of. Tekken is a game that I bounced off of. Soul Calibur was, right? I'm going to pick one of those games and I'm going to analyze it through this lens and find out what is it in Tekken that I can latch onto. And I will latch onto that and see if I can enjoy the experience. There is something fundamental about fighting games that I love, and Tekken is obviously a fighting game. So why do I not love Tekken? Maybe I'm not looking at the right things, and using this in order to kind of, once again, reassess your own values. It's a self-correcting system, but we have tools that we can use to aid us in deciding, are our values consistent? Do they work for me? Are they achieving their goals? What are the things that I like and what are the things that matter to me? So I'm going to use this basement interpretation to do that. And I hope y'all join me in this endeavor as well. Man, it has been great, friends. I've been talking for 3 hours and 50 minutes now. It has been a long class. I thank you for joining me here at FGCU. I really appreciate y'all coming through and sharing your opinions and insights and helping us build this basement interpretation together. Absolutely, everyone. Have a lovely weekend out there. Stay safe. Make sure to take care of yourselves and each other. And we will be back on Monday for Niche Fighter Monday. I do not know what we're playing yet, but it's going to be interesting. It always is. And I hope you'll join me for that. So, take care, everyone. Make sure to follow me on the Twitters. I got stuff on YouTube's. I'll be cutting this together and sharing it with the world. Yeah, and get out there and apply the basement interpretation to the games that you come across. You're absolutely welcome, everybody. Take care of yourselves. I will see you on the other side. Cheers.